Fuel's gone! We stop here! We die here! The shout cracked through the Montana whiteout like a gunshot. 50 Harleys roared blind through the storm, their headlights swallowed whole by the wall of snow hammering down from the black sky. Wind slammed across the frozen county road so hard it shoved the bikes sideways, turning chrome monsters into trembling shadows on ice. At the front of the pack, club president Mason Creed gripped his handlebars with gloved fists gone numb. Snow crusted his beard, froze on his lashes, and turned every breath into white smoke. Then the engine beneath him coughed, once, twice, and died. One by one, the others followed. The sound of 50 motorcycles fading into silence in the middle of nowhere was worse than any crash. It sounded like death arriving. If you've ever seen the kind of storm that turns men into ghosts and roads into graves, hit subscribe and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Mason planted his boots into knee-deep snow and ripped off his goggles. Check the tanks. The men moved fast, boots crunching, curses swallowed by the wind, bone dry. Mine too. Nothing left. The storm had forced them 30 miles off the main highway after the gas station at Alder Creek was mysteriously closed. The old route through Black Hollow Ridge had looked shorter on the map. Now it looked like the end of 50 lives. The whiteout was so thick Mason could barely make out the riders nearest him. These weren't kids on weekend cruisers. These were old-school roadmen, veterans, mechanics, fathers, ex-Marines, Iron Blood brothers from 3 Montana chapters making the annual Winter Founder Ride. A sacred tradition. One ride every January. No matter the storm, no matter the road, no rider left behind. But tonight, for the first time in club history, that code was being tested by the mountain itself. A younger rider named Cole staggered over, snow-coating his leather vest. We got maybe 20 minutes before frostbite starts hitting fingers. Mason scanned the darkness, nothing but dead trees, wire fences, the distant shapes of low hills, and then a light, weak, golden, far through the storm to the north. At first, it looked like a hallucination. Then lightning cracked across the clouds, and for 1 second, the land opened in silver. A house, old, 2 stories, barn behind it, a porch lantern swinging in the wind. Mason pointed. There. Some riders hesitated. One of the older men, Denny Graves, stared hard through the blizzard. No, his voice came low. Not that road. Mason turned. What? Denny swallowed. Black Hollow Widow. Even through the cold, several men went quiet. The rumor had been around these parts for decades. An old woman living alone beyond the edge of Briar's End Village. People said livestock vanished near her fences, said travelers who cut across her road never came back the same, said strange lights burned in her barn all night, said the land itself was cursed. Cole gave a nervous laugh. You serious right now? Denny didn't smile. I'm serious enough to tell you locals never stop there. The wind screamed over them, violent and merciless. Another rider nearly slipped as the ice thickened beneath his boots. Mason looked back toward the light. Whatever she was, witch or widow, cursed or crazy, she had walls, and walls meant warmth. We move, Mason said. No one argued. The next 15 minutes felt like marching through a grave. They pushed the bikes through snowdrifts, boots sinking deep, hands burning from frozen metal. Wind tore at their jackets and turned every breath sharp as knives. By the time they reached the fence line, half the men could barely feel their fingers. The house stood alone on a wide stretch of land at the edge of frozen fields, not on a mountain, not in the woods, just far enough from the village to be forgotten. Its isolation made it feel bigger somehow. Like the storm itself bent around it. The barn doors stood chained shut. An old pickup truck sat half buried in snow. The farmhouse windows glowed amber, warm, alive. Mason climbed the porch steps, each board groaning under his boots. Before he could knock, the front door opened. The woman standing there had to be 80, maybe older, silver hair braided over one shoulder, a thick wool cardigan under an old ranch coat, a lantern in one hand, a shotgun in the other. Her face was lined with years, but her eyes were clear and hard as winter sky. She looked past Mason, past the porch, at the 50 stranded bikers behind him. No fear, just sharp calculation. Well, she said, voice steady over the storm, either hell finally froze over or 50 fools ran out of fuel. A few men actually laughed from pure shock. Mason exhaled fog. "Ma'am, we didn't mean to trespass. Station on Alder Creek was shut. GPS sent us wrong. We're freezing out here." Her eyes narrowed at the bikes, then at their cuts, then at Mason's weather-beaten face. For a long moment she said nothing. The wind howled through the porch rails. Finally she stepped aside. "Bring them into the barn first. House can hold 10. Barn can save 50. Mason blinked. "You'd help us?" The old woman lifted the shotgun slightly. "Don't make me regret it." The barn was bigger inside than it looked from the storm. Old timber beams, hay bales stacked high, a potbelly stove in the center, fuel drums against the far wall, blankets folded on shelves, like she'd prepared for this. The riders worked fast, rolling the Harleys inside, hands trembling from cold and relief. The warmth from the stove hit like heaven. Some men sat right on the floorboards, staring into the fire in silence. Others flexed frozen fingers, cursing as feeling returned. The old woman moved among them with a quiet authority that felt almost military. "Blankets on the left. Fuel canisters stay sealed till morning. Coffee in 5 minutes." Nobody questioned her, not even the hardest men in the club. Mason followed her deeper into the barn, past shelves of tools and old wooden crates. Then he saw it, carved into the back wall above an ancient workbench, a symbol, winged skull, iron wheel beneath it, a torch crossing through the center, old, hand-carved, faded by decades. Mason froze. He knew that symbol. Every patched member in Montana knew it. It was the original founder mark, the first emblem ever used before the modern club patch. Only one man had used that crest, a legend, a ghost in club history. The founder nobody had seen in 40 years. Mason turned slowly toward the old woman. The firelight flickered across her face. She followed his stare to the symbol. For the first time, something changed in her eyes. Not fear, memory, pain. "Where did you get that?" Mason asked quietly. The woman looked toward the storm outside, then back at the carved crest. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "My husband built this barn." A gust of wind slammed the outer doors. The lantern flame trembled. Then she said the name, and every biker in the barn went still. Elias Harper. The stove popped. No one breathed, because every man there knew one truth. Elias Harper was the man who founded their brotherhood, and they had just spent the last hour being saved by his widow. The name hit the barn like thunder. No one moved. No one even reached for the coffee the old widow had begun pouring into dented tin mugs near the stove. 50 hardened riders stood in absolute silence, staring at the woman in the firelight as snow hissed against the barn roof. Mason Creed slowly turned back toward the carved founder crest on the wall. The winged skull, the iron wheel, the torch. No replicas, no tourist junk, no biker bar decoration. This wood had age in it, real age, the kind that carried fingerprints from another lifetime. He looked back at her. "You're telling me," Mason said carefully, voice low, "Elias Harper lived here?" The woman handed him a mug of black coffee. "No," she said. Her pale blue eyes held his. "I'm telling you he built every board around you with his own hands." The riders exchanged stunned looks. Denny Graves took off his gloves slowly, staring at the crest like he was looking at scripture. "My father rode under that mark," he muttered. "First Montana winter runs, before the modern patch." The widow gave the smallest nod. "Then your father knew what kind of man Elias was." She moved toward the stove, feeding another split log into the flames. The orange light deepened across the barn, warming frozen leather, chrome, and old ghosts. For the first time, the men got a better look around. This wasn't just a storage barn, it was a preserved world. Ancient road maps pinned to one wall, rusting gas cans stacked in perfect rows, snow chains, tool benches, old saddlebags, a work table scarred by decades of metalwork, and, hanging above it, a black and white photograph, a younger version of the widow, maybe in her 30s, smiling beside a towering, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and a road jacket, the original crest stitched across his chest. Even through the faded age of the picture, the man radiated command. Mason stepped closer. Damn! There was no question. The face matched the oil portrait hanging in the Montana clubhouse. Elias Harper, founder, winter road captain, the man who wrote the first Brotherhood Code. No rider dies in the cold. Cole stared at the photo. Why didn't anybody know about this place? The widow's expression changed. Not anger, something older. A tired sadness sharpened by decades. Because men in town made sure no one came near it. That line shifted the whole room. Mason narrowed his eyes. What men? Before she could answer, one of the riders by the barn doors called out, "President!" Mason turned. The rider held up his phone. One weak bar of signal had returned. The weather app flashed red. Blizzard warning extended until morning. Road closures, all county exits shut down. They weren't leaving tonight, not if they wanted to survive. The widow seemed unsurprised. Then you're staying. No one argued. Within the next half hour, the barn became a temporary fortress. The men parked the Harleys in clean rows between hay bales and support beams. Wet gloves hung near the stove. Snow-crusted cuts dripped onto old concrete. Coffee moved hand to hand. The widow, she finally introduced herself as Evelyn Harper, ran the place with the calm authority of someone who had survived worse winters than this. Fuel's in the red drums. Use only what you need. Hay on the east side is dry if anyone needs bedding. House porch line still has power if your radios need charging. She spoke like a quartermaster, like this exact emergency had happened before. Mason watched her from across the stove. For 80 years old, she moved with frightening steadiness. No wasted steps, no hesitation, no fear of 50 patched men in her barn. That alone told him more than any rumor. This woman knew bikers, not the way civilians knew them, not as legends or threats, as people, as brothers. Denny sat near the stove, rubbing warmth into his hands. My old man used to talk about Harper's widow. The room turned toward him. He looked up. Said Elias married the only woman in Montana tough enough to drag a full Harley through a snow ditch by herself. That got a ripple of laughter. Even Evelyn smirked. He exaggerated. Mason glanced toward the barn doors. You said men in town kept people away from here. The laughter faded. Evelyn set down the kettle. For the first time, something in her posture hardened. She looked not at Mason, but beyond the barn walls, toward the invisible village buried somewhere past the storm. Briar's End wasn't always like this, she said quietly. 40 years ago, it was a decent farming town. Church bells, livestock auctions, kids riding bikes down Main Street. She paused. Then tourism money came. No one interrupted. New mayor, new sheriff, new people who saw roads and land before they saw families. Mason leaned forward. And they wanted this place. Her eyes met his. This road connects the North County Pass to the state highway, shortest winter route in the region. Cole immediately understood. Commercial access. Evelyn nodded. They wanted gas stations, strip stores, a shopping plaza for the ski traffic. Mason's jaw tightened. And your house sits on the exact spot. Yes? The barn fell silent again. Outside, wind slammed snow against the walls, hard enough to make the beams groan. Evelyn's voice lowered. When Elias died, they came the very same spring. No theatrics, no tears. That made it hit harder. First it was offers, then warnings, then rumors. Denny muttered under his breath. What kind of rumors? Evelyn gave a humorless smile. That I was crazy. That the land was cursed. That my husband buried weapons in the barn. That livestock disappeared near my fields. That people who stopped here vanished. Cole looked stunned. That's why everyone in town calls this Black Hollow Widow Road. Yes. Mason stared into the fire. The setup was obvious now. Drive down land value, isolate the owner, turn the town against her, make her easy to remove. Old trick, dirty trick, but effective. And the sheriff helped? Evelyn's silence answered before her words did. He signed every complaint, approved every fake safety inspection, closed every complaint I filed. The anger in the barn changed temperature. This wasn't abstract corruption anymore. This was a widow surviving 40 winters alone while an entire town was taught to fear her. Cole shook his head. They made you a ghost so nobody would ask questions. Evelyn looked at him, almost surprised someone said it so plainly. Yes? A heavy beat passed. Then, one of the older riders named Briggs stood and walked toward the back workbench. Something on the wall had caught his eye. A framed paper, yellowed, protected behind dusty glass. He leaned closer. "Mason." The president crossed over. The others followed. The paper was old parchment, cracked with age. At the top, the Brotherhood Winter Code, 1974, signed Elias Harper. Below it, the first law. Mason read it aloud. "No rider dies in the cold." The whole barn seemed to inhale. Then Briggs pointed lower. There was another line, smaller, handwritten. "This house stands open to any rider in winter need, by my blood and by my road." E.H. Mason looked back at Evelyn. She stood by the stove, face lit by orange flame and old memory. "My husband made me promise," she said softly. "No rider would ever freeze on his road." The blizzard screamed outside. The men looked at the storm, then at the house, then at the widow. This wasn't random. This was legacy, sacred ground. And suddenly, the annual Founder Ride no longer felt symbolic. It felt like fate. Then, from outside, headlights, bright, multiple, cutting through the storm toward the property, a truck engine, then another. Mason stepped toward the barn doors. Evelyn's face changed instantly. This time it was fear, real fear. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That's them." Mason looked at her. "Who?" The headlights stopped just outside the fence line. Truck doors slammed. Men's voices carried through the storm. Evelyn's next words froze every rider in place. "The mayor's demolition crew." The headlights cut through the blizzard like blades. 3 pickup trucks rolled up beyond the frozen fence line, engines growling low beneath the storm. Their beams washed across the snow-covered yard, over the half-buried tractor, the old barn doors, and finally the long row of Harleys now sheltered inside. For one long second, nobody in the barn spoke. Then Mason turned to Evelyn. "You knew they'd come tonight?" The old widow didn't answer immediately. She stared toward the light bleeding through the cracks in the barn boards, face pale in the fire glow. "No," she said at last, "but I knew they'd come soon." Outside, truck doors slammed. Heavy boots crunched through snow. The sound was slow, confident, the sound of men who thought the land already belonged to them. Cole moved toward the fuel drums. "Want us to shut the lights?" Mason raised a hand. "No sudden moves." This wasn't the moment for war. Not yet. Not until he understood the board. Evelyn stepped closer, voice barely above the stove crackle. "The mayor's been waiting for winter." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Why winter?" She looked up at him. "Because storms make accidents believable." That line turned the barn colder than the blizzard outside. Denny muttered, "Jesus." Evelyn kept going, words clipped, factual. "He's been trying to force me out for 11 years. Condemnation notices, road access violations, false structural reports, tax penalties that disappeared whenever I proved them wrong." Mason could already see the shape of it. Push, pressure, isolate, wait until age and weather finish the rest. And tonight, with the roads shut and the town buried under snow, they probably thought no one would know what happened out here. One of the younger riders moved to the side window slit and peered out. 4 men, one in a sheriff's winter coat. Mason's jaw flexed. So the sheriff came personally. Evelyn gave a bitter nod. He always does when they want to make it look official. The barn doors rattled under a hard knock. Then a voice boomed through the storm. "Mrs. Harper." The tone carried that polished false authority Mason had heard from bad cops and corrupt county men his whole life. "Open up! County inspection order!" A few riders laughed darkly. At midnight, in a blizzard, on condemned back roads. Yeah, real official. Mason looked at Evelyn. "Do you want to speak to them?" Her hands tightened around the lantern. For the first time since they arrived, she looked every bit her age. Not weak, just tired. Tired in the way only decades of fighting the same evil can make a person. Before she could answer, the knock came again, harder this time. "Mrs. Harper, failure to comply may result in immediate seizure of property," Cole whispered. "That's your answer right there." Mason nodded slowly. Then he stepped toward the barn doors. 50 pairs of eyes followed him. Evelyn caught his sleeve. "Mason." He turned. Her pale blue eyes locked on his. "Do not let them touch Elias's workshop." There was no fear in the request, only something sacred. Mason gave one slow nod. No one touches this place. He pulled the barn door open. The storm exploded inward. Snow blasted across the floorboards, swirling around his boots as 4 figures stood in the white dark. 2 deputies, a county foreman in a reflective jacket, and in the center, Sheriff Nolan Mercer, late 60s, heavy-set, expensive wool coat under the official jacket, the kind of man who looked more politician than lawman. Snow clung to his gray mustache as his eyes swept past Mason's shoulder. Then his gaze landed on the rows of motorcycles inside, and froze. For the first time, the sheriff looked genuinely confused, because he hadn't come expecting witnesses, certainly not 50 of them. His eyes lifted to the cuts, the patches, the road-worn faces, the hard silence of men who had no reason to fear county badges. Mason stepped fully into the doorway. "You got a reason to be on this property after midnight, Sheriff?" Mercer's expression reset fast. A practiced liar. "This is county business." He tried to peer past Mason again. "We've had repeated reports that the barn structure is unsafe and the residence is under emergency storm condemnation." Behind Mason, several bikers exchanged looks of disbelief. Emergency storm condemnation. Even the phrase sounded manufactured. Mason folded his arms. "At midnight?" Mercer's smile tightened. "Storm damage doesn't wait for office hours." Mason took one step down into the snow. Now they stood almost eye to eye. "Funny thing is, Sheriff, this barn's standing stronger than your story." One of the deputies shifted uneasily. The foreman kept glancing at the Harleys. No one there had expected resistance, definitely not organized resistance. Mercer's eyes flicked to Evelyn behind Mason. Something ugly flashed there. "Mrs. Harper," he called, voice rising, "you were already informed this land is under review for public safety and commercial redevelopment." There it was, the real reason. Not safety, not weather, not concern. Land. Evelyn stepped into view, lantern held high. The storm lit her silver braid in flying snow. "This land belongs to my family," she said calmly. "My husband built every inch of it." The sheriff gave a tired, fake sigh. "Your husband's been dead 40 years, Evelyn. The town needs progress." That word hit Mason wrong. Progress. The kind of word greedy men use before they erase people. The foreman finally spoke up, nervous. "Mayor wants the survey team in at first light. The shopping plaza investors are all ready." Mercer shot him a sharp look. Too late. Every biker in the doorway heard it. Cole muttered behind Mason. "So that's the play." Mason looked directly at the sheriff. "You spread ghost stories about this woman for 40 years over a damn shopping center?" Mercer's face hardened. "Stay out of local matters, biker." That single word changed the air. Not because it was offensive, because it carried dismissal. The assumption that Mason and his men were drifters, temporary, meaningless. Mercer still hadn't realized whose barn he was standing in. Mason leaned slightly closer. "You know whose property this is?" The sheriff frowned. "I know exactly whose it's about to become." Mason's voice dropped low, dangerously calm. "No, you really don't." Behind him, Denny stepped forward holding the framed parchment. The Brotherhood Winter Code, 1974, signed by Elias Harper. Even through the storm, Mercer recognized the name. His face changed. A flicker. Small, but there. Recognition, history, fear. Denny lifted the parchment higher so the deputies and foremen could see. "You've been trying to steal Founder ground." The words landed like a hammer. The younger deputy whispered under his breath, "Founder?" Now the sheriff understood what stood behind Mason. Not random stranded riders, not tourists, not weekend road fools. This was the Founder Ride. 3 Montana chapters, 50 men, and the widow he'd spent decades isolating had just accidentally sheltered the one group in the state he couldn't easily bully. Mercer's jaw tightened. "This changes nothing." Mason smiled for the first time, cold, merciless. "It changes everything." A deep rumble of thunder rolled over the plains. Or maybe not thunder. Another engine, then another. From farther down the road, more headlights began to glow through the storm. Cole stepped to the doorway, peering through the snow. His eyes widened. "President..." Mason didn't turn. "What?" Cole's grin spread slow and dangerous. "That's not thunder." The lights multiplied in the storm-dark road beyond the sheriff's trucks, rows of them, single headlights, wide bars, low, heavy engine growls, more Harleys, dozens. Denny exhaled a laugh. Looks like the other chapters found the storm route. Sheriff Mercer slowly turned toward the road and watched in horror as an entire second wave of riders thundered through the blizzard toward the Harper Ranch. The widow's land was no longer isolated. By sunrise, it would become sacred ground. The sound started as a tremor beneath the storm, low, heavy, familiar. Then, the night beyond the sheriff's trucks exploded into a river of headlights, one beam, then 5, then 10, then too many to count through the whiteout. Harley engines rolled across the frozen fields like artillery thunder, deeper and meaner than the first pack that had reached Evelyn's barn. Snow sprayed in wild sheets as the second wave carved through the county road, chrome and black iron slicing the storm apart. Sheriff Mercer's face drained of color. The first rider burst through the snow curtain and slid sideways into the yard with perfect control. Then another, and another. Within seconds, 30 more Harleys surrounded the trucks in a crescent of roaring engines and spinning snow. The demolition foreman physically stepped backward. One deputy whispered, "Oh, hell." Denny Graves gave a dark chuckle. That'd be the Western chapters. Mason finally stepped off the porch and into the snow, boots crunching slow as the second pack killed their engines one by one. Silence followed, the kind of silence that makes bad men hear consequences before they arrive. At the head of the new group sat a giant of a man in his 70s, silver beard braided with leather bands, shoulders still broad enough to fill the storm. He pulled off his goggles. "Creed." Mason nodded once. "Ronan. Ronan Vance, president of the Western Montana chapter, old enough to have ridden with men who had ridden with Elias Harper himself." His pale eyes moved from Mason to the barn to Evelyn standing in the doorway with the lantern. Then his expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. He slowly dismounted and walked toward her through the snow like a man stepping into church. When he stopped before the porch, he removed his gloves, a sign of respect. His voice came low. "Ma'am, are you Evelyn Harper?" The widow looked at him carefully. "Yes." For a moment the storm disappeared from Ronan's face. He looked younger somehow, like a memory had reached across 40 years and found him. "I was 19 the last time I stood in this yard." The barn went quiet. Even Mercer turned, confused. Ronan's eyes drifted toward the workshop side of the barn. "Elias gave me my first winter chains right there after I dumped my panhead in the north ditch." A faint, sad smile touched Evelyn's lips. "That sounds like him." Ronan looked down for a second, gathering himself. Then he said the line that changed the entire emotional weight of the night. "He saved my life in the winter of '78. The riders behind him bowed their heads slightly. This wasn't just founder legend anymore. This was living memory. Mercer tried to recover control. He stepped forward, raising his voice over the wind. "This property remains under county review." No one even looked at him. That was worse than shouting. He wasn't feared. He wasn't respected. He had become irrelevant. Mason turned slowly. "You still talking?" The sheriff's jaw flexed. "You bikers think intimidation changes legal ownership?" Ronan laughed once, cold, humorless. "Legal ownership?" He pointed toward the farmhouse. "That woman's husband built the road half your investors used to get to town." Then, toward the barn. "He built this shelter under the first Winter Brotherhood Code." Then, toward Mercer. "And you've spent 40 years trying to erase him." Every rider there could now feel the real shape of the war. This wasn't just land theft. This was legacy theft. The demolition foreman nervously pulled out a clipboard. "We have survey authority signed by Mayor Dalton Reeves." The second he said the mayor's name, Evelyn's face hardened. Mason noticed. "Reeves," she said quietly. "His father started this." All eyes turned to her. The storm hissed around the porch lantern. Evelyn stepped forward, lantern light catching in her eyes. 42 years ago, his father was on the county board when Elias refused to sell this road exit. Her voice stayed calm. No drama, just truth sharpened by time. They wanted a truck stop first. When that failed, they tried a ski lodge, then gas contracts, then outlet stores. Ronan muttered. Same bloodline greed. She nodded. When Elias died in the spring, they thought I'd be easier, Mercer snapped. You're an old woman living alone on unusable land. The moment the words left his mouth, every biker in the snow shifted. Bad move. Mason took a step forward. Then Ronan lifted a hand. No violence. Not yet. Instead, the old president looked directly at Mercer. You know why founder roads matter? Mercer said nothing. Ronan's voice lowered. Because every chapter in this state recognizes them as protected legacy ground. Now the sheriff looked genuinely uncertain. That was the first crack. The foreman frowned. Protected by what law? Ronan smiled thinly. Sometimes law comes later than consequence. The line landed hard. But before the tension could peak, one of the riders from Mason's group called from inside the barn. President, Mason turned. The younger rider held an old leather ledger book, dust-covered and half-hidden beneath tools in the workshop. Found this under the workbench, Evelyn's breath caught. No. She moved faster than anyone expected for her age, crossing the barn floor toward the ledger. Her hands trembled as she touched the cracked leather cover. I haven't seen this since Elias died. Mason opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten entries, fuel logs, road maps, names, dozens of names, early riders, founding members, winter routes, and tucked between the pages, a folded county land agreement, yellowed, stamped, signed by Elias Harper and County Board Chairman Thomas Reeves, the mayor's father. Cole leaned in. What is it? Evelyn stared at the document, her face turned to stone. This proves they lied. Mason looked up sharply. How? She pointed at the lower paragraph, her voice almost whispered. This land was deed protected as permanent emergency rider shelter. No commercial seizure, no county redevelopment, no eminent domain. The foreman's face went blank. Mercer's eyes widened before he could hide it, because now the truth was obvious. The mayor's entire shopping center plan was fraud. Every rumor, every inspection, every condemnation, every sheriff visit, all built on a lie they knew wouldn't survive daylight. Ronan looked toward the road disappearing into storm. Then by sunrise, he said, the whole town learns what they did. Mercer's voice turned sharp. You won't make it to town in this weather. Mason slowly closed the ledger. A dangerous smile touched his face. We don't need to. He looked behind Mercer's trucks. More headlights. Cars this time, not bikes, villagers. The storm had carried the sound of nearly 80 Harleys across the plains. Porch lights were turning on all over Briar's End. People were coming, curious, afraid, awake. And by morning, the lies around Black Hollow Widow Road would begin to die. Then Evelyn looked out toward the growing lights and whispered something that made Mason realize the real war had only just begun. The mayor won't wait for morning. She tightened her grip on the ledger. He'll send the bulldozers before dawn. The words hung in the barn heavier than the storm. He'll send the bulldozers before dawn. For a moment, the only sound was wind clawing at the barn walls and the slow metallic ticking of cooling Harley engines. Then Mason Creed snapped into motion. How long? Evelyn kept her eyes on the ledger in her hands. Mayor Reeves keeps the demolition crew at the old lumber yard 2 miles south of Briar's End. If Mercer already warned him, she looked toward the black windows of the farmhouse. They'll move before first light. Ronan Vance stepped closer, snow still melting from his beard. Then they're not after paperwork anymore. Evelyn's expression turned grim. No, she pointed through the storm toward the open stretch of frozen land beyond the fence. They'll come from the south access road. Easier route for heavy machines. Mason immediately started mapping it in his head. Open plain, frozen ditches, limited visibility. Perfect for a surprise push. But they had numbers now. Terrain and founder ground. This wasn't a retreat scenario. This was a hold. Cole kicked a hay bale into position near the side doors. So what's the plan, President? Mason looked around at the 80 riders now packed between barn, porch, and yard. Some were thawing hands, some checking chains, some topping emergency fuel, all waiting. The same way soldiers wait when the first order decides the rest of the night. Mason's voice stayed low and hard. We hold the South Road. A ripple of grim approval moved through the men. No panic, no dramatics, just brotherhood discipline. Ronan nodded. Western chapter takes the fence line. Good, Mason pointed toward the farmhouse. No one lets machinery within 50 yards of this house. Then he turned to Evelyn. Is there anything else they'd target first? For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. The workshop. Every man in the barn followed her gaze. At the far end, beyond the stove and the founder crest, stood a separate timber room attached to the back wall, Elias Harper's workshop, the real heart of the ranch. Evelyn's voice dropped. Everything important is still in there. The ledger in her hands, old road maps, founding records, land agreements, original Brotherhood charters. Mason understood instantly. The mayor didn't just want land, he needed that room destroyed before daylight, proof burned, legacy erased, fraud protected. Ronan spat into the snow by the doorway. So the old bastard means to bury history with bulldozer tracks. Mason's stare hardened. Not tonight. The men moved fast. Within 20 minutes, the Harper Ranch transformed from storm shelter into a winter fortress. Harleys were repositioned in staggered rows along the south fence line, their heavy frames forming barriers against incoming vehicles. Snow chains were wrapped around tires for traction, fuel drums cracked open, portable lamps rigged beneath porch overhangs. The younger riders laid spike chains from old workshop steel across the narrow southern track, hidden beneath fresh snow. Cole grinned while setting the last one. Let's see how much the mayor likes expensive equipment after that. Inside the farmhouse, Evelyn moved through old cabinets with surprising speed. When Mason stepped in behind her, he found her pulling thick folders from a hidden compartment behind the fireplace bricks. He stopped. You kept backups. She gave him a tired look. You don't survive 40 years of greedy men without learning. Inside the folders, land deeds, county maps, original founder charter signatures, letters from Thomas Reeves admitting emergency shelter protection, sheriff complaint copies with matching forged timestamps. Mason exhaled slowly. This wasn't just corruption. This was generational theft. The mayor had inherited the fraud from his father. Evelyn caught his expression. His father smiled when he lied to Elias. She placed another folder into Mason's hands. Dalton smiles the same way. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, but this time it wasn't weather. Engines, heavy ones, diesel. Everyone in the house froze. Cole's voice came from the porch. President, South Road. Mason and Ronan stepped outside together. At first, all they saw was darkness and snow. Then, through the white curtain came two massive yellow lights, too high for trucks, too wide for pickups, bulldozers. Behind them, more lights followed, excavators, county loaders, support trucks. Mayor Reeves hadn't waited. He'd come personally. The convoy pushed slowly through the storm, metal tracks grinding frozen earth. At its center rode a black SUV, warm lights behind tinted glass, the kind of vehicle men use when they want to watch destruction without touching dirt. Cole muttered, "Coward cage." The SUV door opened. Mayor Dalton Reeves stepped out in a long black winter coat, umbrella held by an assistant, mid-50s, perfect hair, polished boots. The smile of a man who thought money had already decided the future. His eyes swept across the field, across the Harleys, the fence line, the 80 riders standing in snow. The smile faltered, only for a second. Then it came back. Synthetic confidence. He raised his voice. Mrs. Harper? Evelyn stepped onto the porch beside Mason, lantern in hand. The wind whipped her silver braid behind her. This property is under emergency seizure for public safety and state winter route expansion. Mason actually laughed. State winter route expansion. The lies were getting lazier. Evelyn's voice cut across the storm. You forged every notice. Dalton spread his hands, fake sympathy in every movement. Evelyn, you're an elderly woman alone on unsafe land. I offered fair compensation. From behind the porch rail, Denny muttered. Translation, pennies and pressure. Dalton's eyes shifted to the riders, then to Mason. And who exactly are these gentlemen? Mason stepped forward into the snow. The porch light caught the patch on his cut. President, Montana Brotherhood Charter. Dalton's smile tightened. You're interfering with county operations. Mason's answer came like steel. You're standing on founder ground. For the first time, real irritation cracked the mayor's polished face. He waved a hand toward the bulldozers. This house is coming down before sunrise. The diesel engines roared louder. Tracks bit into snow. One of the machines began creeping toward the south gate. That was when Ronan lifted one hand. A signal. Every Harley on the fence line roared to life at once. 80 engines. The sound hit the frozen plains like war drums. Snow blew sideways from the force of exhaust and spinning chains. The bulldozer operator visibly hesitated. The entire machine slowed. Dalton shouted over the roar. "You think motorcycles stop state equipment?" Mason reached into his jacket and slowly held up the founder ledger. Then Evelyn raised the sealed land deed. Ronan stepped beside them, and his voice carried through the blizzard like judgment. "No. But fraud stops everything." Dalton's face changed. For the first time that night, fear. Because he realized the widow hadn't just survived the storm, she had found witnesses, legacy, proof, and an army. Then, from the road behind the mayor's convoy came a new sound. Not engines, voices, dozens of them, townspeople, lanterns, flashlights, cars, pickups. The whole village of Briar's End was waking up and following the thunder of Harleys to the Harper Ranch. The lies were about to meet daylight, and Dalton Reeves knew it. He looked toward the bulldozers, then at Mercer, then back at the growing crowd. His voice dropped into a cold whisper. "Take the workshop first." Mason heard every word, and now the real battle began. Take the workshop first. Mayor Dalton Reeves thought he whispered it low enough for only Sheriff Mercer and the nearest bulldozer crew to hear. He was wrong. Mason Creed had spent 30 years reading men and engine noise, bar fights, and battlefield silences. Against the scream of the blizzard, the mayor's cold little order landed perfectly. And in that instant, Mason understood the truth. This was never about the house. The house was emotional leverage. The workshop was the real target. That room held the founder records, the original shelter deed, the first charter papers, every lie the Reeves family had buried for 40 years. Destroy the workshop, and history died in the snow. Mason's voice cut through the roar of 80 Harleys. "South Line, lock the workshop." The response was instant. 10 riders broke from the fence line and peeled off toward the timber room attached to the rear of the barn. Boots hit frozen ground hard as they formed a human wall between Elias Harper's workshop and the advancing machines. Cole dragged an old steel chain from the side shed and wrapped it across the narrow workshop lane. Ronan's western chapter moved to reinforce the left flank, bikes repositioning in a V-shaped barricade that forced the bulldozers into a tighter approach. The mayor's first machine pushed forward anyway, huge, yellow, tracks grinding ice and frozen mud, its blade lowered with a metallic groan. The operator clearly thought intimidation would break the old widow and the riders. Instead, he met 80 unmoving men, and one 80-year-old woman standing on the porch with a lantern in one hand and Elias Harper's land deed in the other. The townspeople began arriving in earnest now. Pickups slid to stops along the outer road. Lanterns bobbed in the storm. Families in coats and wool hats stared in shock at the sight unfolding on the Harper Ranch. Most had spent decades hearing the same story. Crazy widow, cursed road, haunted land. Now they saw something very different, a warm farmhouse, an old woman standing straight in the storm, and dozens upon dozens of bikers protecting her property like sacred ground. A murmur moved through the growing crowd. Mrs. Ellison, the village postmaster, stepped out from behind a truck. "Evelyn?" The old widow turned. Recognition flickered. "Clara." Clara's weathered face twisted with confusion. "We were told this place was condemned years ago." Evelyn's laugh was soft and sad. "You were told a lot of things." The line spread through the crowd like a spark. People began looking at Mayor Reeves differently, questioning, uneasy, awake. Dalton sensed it immediately. His polished voice rose, smooth as oil. "Folks, please, this is a dangerous structure situation. We're protecting the village's winter root development." But the lie was weaker now. Too many eyes, too much evidence, too many Harleys surrounding founder ground. Sheriff Mercer stepped forward, trying to restore authority. "Everyone back away from the machinery." That was when Evelyn walked down the porch steps. Snow whipped around her boots, silver braid lashing behind her. lantern glow turning her into something almost mythic in the storm. She held up the original deed. Her voice, though old, carried farther than the diesel engines. My husband, Elias Harper, signed county protection on this land in 1974. A stunned hush fell over the townspeople. Even those too young to know the founder's story knew the Harper name, the old road, the winter pass, the emergency shelter line. It had once been village history before the rumors replaced it. Clara stepped closer. Elias Harper? The man who built the old North Pass rescue route? Evelyn nodded. Mayor Reeves's face tightened. He hadn't expected memory to wake up in the town this fast. Mason stepped beside Evelyn and raised the founder ledger. Your mayor's father signed permanent rider shelter status. No demolition. No seizure. No commercial development. The foreman near the bulldozer muttered under his breath, "We were never told that." That line was the first domino. One of the machine operators actually climbed down from his cab. Then another. Both stared at the deed in Evelyn's hands. Mayor Reeves snapped, "Get back in those machines!" But doubt had already infected the crew. Nobody wants to be the man who tears down legally protected founder ground in front of half the town. Then, Sheriff Mercer made the mistake that broke the whole night. He stepped toward Evelyn and reached for the deed. "Give me that." The movement was fast, aggressive, panicked. Before Mason could even move, Ronan Vance was already there. The 70-year-old Western president intercepted Mercer with one iron hand on the sheriff's wrist. Not violent, not wild, just absolute control. Mercer froze. Ronan's pale eyes locked onto him. "You touch her again," his voice stayed almost gentle, "and every lie you sign dies before sunrise." Mercer's face went white, because for the first time in decades, he wasn't standing over an isolated widow. He was surrounded by witnesses, founding documents, rival chapters, townspeople, machine crews losing confidence. The balance of power had shifted completely. Then, from the back of the crowd, came an old, cracked voice. "I remember Elias." Everyone turned. An old man stepped forward with a cane, bundled in a thick ranch coat. Walter Boone, 90 if he was a day, one of the oldest surviving villagers, his eyes fixed on the barn crest visible through the open doors. That mark was on the rescue station wagons in the blizzard of '79. A wave of recognition moved through several older townspeople. Another woman gasped, "He saved my brother on the Winter Ridge." Someone else, "My father used that shelter in the fuel freeze." The myth around Black Hollow Widow Road began collapsing in real time, replaced by memory, replaced by gratitude, replaced by shame. Mayor Reeves saw it happening and made one final desperate gamble. He pointed toward the workshop and shouted at the last loyal bulldozer driver, "Move now!" The machine lurched forward. Its tracks hit the hidden spike chains beneath the snow. The result was instant. A brutal metallic crack split the night as the left track snapped violently off its wheel housing. The bulldozer slammed sideways into a frozen ditch and died in a blast of steam and diesel hiss. The crowd erupted, not cheering, shock. The machine was finished. Cole grinned from the fence line. "Guess the road didn't like his lies." Even some townspeople laughed. That was fatal for Dalton. Once public fear turns to ridicule, power bleeds fast. The mayor stood in the storm, face red with fury, watching the town slip away from him. Then Evelyn lifted the final folder from the hidden fireplace records. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, payment ledgers, county transfers, sheriff signatures, investor kickback percentages, survey fraud approvals. Proof, not rumor, not memory, paper. Dalton saw the folder and all the color left his face. Evelyn looked directly at him. "You lied about me for 40 years. Her voice broke only once, "just to bury my husband's house under concrete." The townspeople stared at the mayor, then at Mercer, then at the broken bulldozer, then at the 80 Harleys standing guard in the storm. And everyone understood the same thing. The widow had never been the danger. The men who ruled the town were. Then, from somewhere behind the crowd, a younger voice shouted, "Call the state investigators!" Mayor Reeves turned toward the road, and for the first time all night he looked like a man who might run. The shout tore through the storm like a starter pistol. "Call the state investigators!" For one suspended second, the entire Harper Ranch froze. Snow, lanterns, 80 idling Harleys, the broken bulldozer hissing steam in the ditch, and Mayor Dalton Reeves standing in the center of it all, finally looking like a man who understood the shape of collapse. His polished confidence was gone now. All that remained was calculation, the kind desperate men do when they realize the truth has become bigger than the lie. Sheriff Mercer stepped close to him, voice low and urgent. "We need to leave." Dalton's jaw tightened. "No." He looked at the townspeople gathering thicker by the minute, faces he'd controlled for years, people he'd steered with fear, permits, zoning promises, and rumor campaigns. He could feel them slipping. If he left now, he lost the narrative. So he did what men like him always do. He reached for one final lie. Raising both hands, Dalton turned toward the crowd with practiced sorrow painted across his face. "People of Briar's End, listen to me." His voice came smooth, measured, almost fatherly. "I never wanted it to happen like this." A few villagers hesitated. Good liars know hesitation is oxygen. Dalton pointed toward the workshop. "That building is unstable. The records they're holding are old and likely forged. Mrs. Harper has lived alone for decades under difficult mental strain." The moment he said it, a low anger rolled through the crowd. He was trying to weaponize age, again, trying to turn the widow back into the village ghost. But something had changed tonight. Now people had seen her, the real Evelyn Harper, strong, prepared, precise, more sane than the men in office. Clara Ellison stepped forward first. Her lantern light caught hard lines in her face. "You told us she poisoned livestock." Dalton forced a sympathetic nod. "That's what county reports indicated." Walter Boone lifted his cane. "Those reports came after your father tried to buy her road access." More murmurs. A younger rancher spoke up from the back. "My grandfather said Elias Harper kept fuel stores for winter rescues right here." Another voice. "My uncle was saved in the freeze of '82. Another. "You told us nobody should ever come here." The pressure began turning, not explosive, worse, public realization, the slow, humiliating death of false authority. Dalton saw it, and his eyes flicked toward the black SUV exit route. Mason noticed, so did Ronan. The two presidents exchanged a look. No words needed. The Western chapter silently repositioned 2 Harleys behind the SUV. Not aggressive, just enough. A reminder. No easy exits. Evelyn stepped forward into the center of lantern light and snow. In her hands now were the kickback ledgers, the real kill shot. She opened the folder and read aloud. Investor transfer, Briar North Commercial Group. County zoning acceleration payment, Sheriff Discretionary Enforcement Fund. Each line landed heavier than the storm. Mercer physically flinched at the sound of his own corruption spoken in public. The villagers erupted into overlapping voices. "What the hell is that? You took money? You tried to bury her land for a mall? Over Founder Shelter Road?" Dalton's face hardened. The politician mask cracked. "You think any of this town survives without development?" There it was. His real belief, not service, ownership. He pointed toward the frozen plains. "This place is dying. No jobs, no tourism expansion, no tax growth." Then, at Evelyn's house, one dead woman's ranch sitting on the best winter route in the county. The silence after that line was absolute. Even Mercer stared at him, because Dalton had just said the quiet part out loud, not progress, profit. Evelyn met his stare. For the first time, there was no sadness in her face, only truth. "My husband built shelter on this land so no one would die in the cold." She lifted the founder deed. "You wanted to turn it into parking spaces." The words cut deeper because they were simple. Human need versus greed. And every person standing there understood which side they were on now. Then headlights appeared from the northern road. Not Harleys, state SUVs, blue and white. Official. The crowd shifted as 3 vehicles pushed slowly through the blizzard and stopped near the fence line. Doors opened. 2 investigators in winter state jackets stepped out. 1 woman, 1 older man with a leather document case. Clara breathed out. Somebody really made the call. The older investigator stepped forward. State Land Fraud Division. He looked first at the broken bulldozer, then the 80 Harleys, then Evelyn holding the deed. Finally, his eyes landed on Dalton Reeves, and something in his face said he already knew more than Dalton wanted. Mayor Reeves, he said calmly, we received multiple emergency reports regarding unlawful seizure of protected county rescue land. Dalton tried to recover. This is a misunderstanding. The female investigator took the founder deed from Evelyn and read the lower seal. Her eyes sharpened. This protection clause is valid. She looked toward the workshop. Permanent emergency rider shelter, historical route status, protected legacy designation. Then she turned slowly toward Dalton and Mercer. Who authorized demolition equipment on protected land? No one answered, because the answer now sat in ledgers, kickbacks, and 40 years of false complaints. Mason stepped forward and handed over the founder ledger, the investor payment sheets, and Mercer's signed enforcement notices. The investigator's expression changed with every page. By the fourth document, she looked at Dalton like he was already finished. Mercer took one step backward, then another. Ronan's voice came from behind him. Wouldn't. Mercer froze. The old Western president stood in the storm, with snow crusting his shoulders, pale eyes hard as iron. Don't make tonight worse than prison already will. The sheriff slowly lowered his head. Defeated. For the first time in 40 years, he had no widow to intimidate, no rumor to hide behind, no county stamp to weaponize, just paper. Paper kills men like him. Then the older investigator looked toward Evelyn. Mrs. Harper, this property is now under immediate state protection until full review. A long silence followed. Then the town began to clap, softly at first, then louder, more voices joining. The sound spread through the snow-covered ranch like warmth returning to frozen fingers. Not applause for drama, respect, for the widow, for Elias, for the truth. Dalton Reeves looked around at the villagers he'd ruled for years. No fear in their faces now, only anger and betrayal. Then he made the worst decision of his life. He lunged for the founder ledger in the investigator's hands, trying to rip the evidence away. Mason moved. Fast, one step, one iron grip on Dalton's wrist. The mayor stopped dead. The entire ranch held its breath. Mason leaned in close, voice low enough that only Dalton heard. You spent 40 years turning a good woman into a ghost. His grip tightened just enough. Tonight the whole town learns who the real monster was. Dalton's face twisted in pain and panic, and in that moment, every camera phone, every town witness, every state investigator saw exactly who he really was. The storm had stopped hiding people. Now it was exposing them. Mayor Dalton Reeves never saw the full collapse coming. He only felt Mason Creed's hand lock around his wrist like a steel vise, and suddenly understood that the night no longer belonged to him. The blizzard had eased to a slow fall now. Snow drifted through the lantern light in soft silver sheets, settling over the broken bulldozer, the lined-up Harleys, and the stunned faces of Briar's End. The storm was ending. And so was Dalton. Mason didn't shove him, didn't threaten him. That made it worse. He simply held the mayor still long enough for every camera, every villager, and every state investigator to see the panic in Dalton's eyes. The female investigator stepped forward first. Mayor Reeves, she said coldly, release all claim over this property immediately. Dalton jerked his arm, trying to recover his dignity. This is political sabotage. The older investigator opened the founder ledger beneath the porch lantern. Page after page flipped in the wind. Fuel routes, shelter signatures, protected winter road designations, then the payment sheets, investor kickbacks, commercial zoning transfers, sheriff discretionary payouts. He looked up. This is felony land fraud, conspiracy to falsify public records, and attempted unlawful demolition of protected legacy property. The words hit the town like a church bell. People began talking over one another again. 40 years? All those rumors? He tried to steal Founderland? He lied about Evelyn all this time? Clara Ellison turned toward the crowd. My son almost froze on County Road 11/6 winters ago. Her voice shook. He survived because Evelyn left fuel by the roadside. That changed everything. The town had spent decades fearing the woman who had quietly kept saving them. Walter Boone raised his cane. She's been protecting this road longer than any sheriff. The shame in the villagers' faces deepened. Old memories began surfacing. Small things they had ignored. Fuel cans left in storms, lanterns on fence posts, warning ropes tied near ice ditches, fresh tire paths after whiteouts. Things they had once called eerie. Now they understood. It had always been Evelyn, helping, protecting, remaining unseen because the town had chosen the mayor's lies over her truth. Evelyn stood still on the porch, lantern light trembling in her eyes. For the first time since the riders arrived, the weight of 40 years seemed to hit her, not as weakness, as release. The burden of being turned into a myth was finally lifting. The female investigator turned to Sheriff Mercer. "Remove your badge." Mercer stared at her. The old instinct to bully flickered behind his eyes. Then he looked at the crowd. No fear there now, only disgust. His shoulders sagged. Slowly, with gloved hands shaking from something colder than the storm, he unclipped the badge from his winter coat and handed it over. The villagers watched in stunned silence. For decades, Mercer had been law in Briar's End. Now, he was just an old, corrupt man in the snow. Dalton saw his last pillar collapse. That was when desperation took over. He yanked free from Mason's grip and stumbled backward toward the black SUV. "Get the files," he shouted at the last deputy still standing near the vehicles. "Burn the workshop if you have to." The words ripped through the ranch. Even the deputy froze. The order was too naked now, too public, too monstrous. Burn the workshop, burn Elias Harper's legacy, burn the widow's truth, burn the proof. The entire town heard it. Dalton realized too late what he had done. Ronan Vance stepped forward, his 70-year-old frame somehow bigger in the lantern glow. His voice rolled out across the snow like judgment. "You just confessed to destroying evidence in front of the whole county." The deputy slowly lowered his hands. He took one step away from the SUV, then another. Done. No loyalty survives public collapse. The state investigators moved immediately. "Mayor Dalton Reeves, you are being detained pending full state review." Dalton's face twisted. "You can't arrest me in the middle of a storm." The older investigator gave him a flat stare. "No. But we can make sure you don't leave." 2 state officers emerged from the SUVs and escorted him toward the back vehicle. The mayor fought just enough to humiliate himself. Nothing more. No power, no authority, no control. Just a man in expensive boots slipping in the snow while the town watched. The visual alone would live in Briar's End forever. The moment the lie lost its footing. As Dalton was led away, he turned toward Evelyn. Hatred burned in his eyes. "This town will still die without development." Evelyn's answer came soft. "No. It almost died because of men like you." No one had a response to that, because everyone there knew it was true. The village hadn't been starving for money. It had been starving for honesty. The state investigators established an immediate perimeter around the workshop and farmhouse. No demolition, no machinery, no removal of records. The foreman quietly ordered the remaining equipment to shut down and pull back from the south road. Diesel engines died one by one. For the first time all night, the Harper Ranch stood in complete peace. Snow fell gently over founder ground. The Harleys idled low, like sleeping animals guarding sacred land. Mason climbed the porch beside Evelyn. She still held the old founder deed in both hands. He looked at her carefully. "You all right?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Then her eyes drifted toward the workshop, toward the carved crest, toward the room Elias built, toward the place she had defended alone for 40 winters. "I thought they'd finally bury him tonight." Her voice cracked once, just once. Mason's expression softened. "They almost buried the truth." Ronan joined them, removing his gloves as a sign of respect. "Not anymore." He looked toward the gathering riders, then toward the town. "By morning, every chapter in Montana will know this place still stands." Evelyn gave a faint, almost disbelieving smile. "All these years, and he still found a way to send riders when the storm came." That line hit every man on the porch, because in a way, it felt true. The annual founder ride, the closed gas station, the forced detour, the exact road, the exact storm, the exact night the mayor made his move. Fate had ridden through snow on Harley wheels. Then, Clara Ellison approached the porch slowly. Behind her stood more townspeople, dozens now, not afraid anymore, ashamed, grateful, ready. Clara removed her gloves. "Evelyn," her voice trembled, "we believed them." The old widow looked at the people who had avoided her road for decades, the people who had repeated the whispers, the people who had let her become a ghost. Then she said the most powerful thing she could have said. "I know." No accusation, no bitterness, just truth. And that grace broke the remaining wall between her and the town. Several villagers began quietly crying. Walter Boone removed his hat. "Tomorrow we help rebuild the south fence." Another voice. "I'll bring lumber." Another. "We'll clear the road by sunrise." Another. "No one touches this house again." Mason looked out over the town, the riders, the founder crest glowing in the barn light. The real victory had already happened. Not the arrest, not the fraud exposure, the return of the town. But then Evelyn looked toward the workshop and whispered something that turned the whole story deeper. "There's one more thing in there." Mason turned. "What?" Her eyes lifted to the old timber room. "Something Elias left for the rider who would save this house." The porch fell silent, because now it no longer felt like coincidence. It felt like the founder had planned for this night. The porch went completely still. Snow drifted in slow silver spirals through the lantern light while the last of the diesel engines faded into the distance. Behind the retreating state vehicles, Mayor Dalton Reeves disappeared into the storm, no longer a ruler, no longer untouchable, just another man carried away by the consequences of his own greed. But nobody on the Harper ranch was thinking about Dalton anymore, not after what Evelyn had just said. "Something Elias left for the rider who would save this house." Mason stared at her. The old widow's pale blue eyes held no drama, no mystery performance, just the steady certainty of a woman who had carried one final promise for 40 years. Ronan Vance removed his hat. "You never opened it?" Evelyn slowly shook her head. "He told me the night before the blizzard of '84. Her gaze drifted toward the workshop, beyond the barn, beyond the carved founder crest. "He said if the house was ever truly threatened, the right rider would arrive in the storm." The 80 bikers standing across the snow exchanged looks. Even the townspeople went quiet. The line felt bigger than story, bigger than coincidence, because every man there knew the founder ride had been forced off course by the mysteriously closed gas station at Alder Creek, the exact detour, the exact storm, the exact road. Mason looked toward the workshop. "Show me." The room smelled of cedar, old oil, and metal shavings frozen in time. Elias Harper's workshop had survived like a sealed memory. The timber walls were lined with hand tools, chain hooks, carburetor kits, and ancient winter maps. On the far bench sat an unfinished motorcycle tank, the old founder crest half-etched into steel. The state investigators stood respectfully outside the doorway, letting the riders and Evelyn enter first. This wasn't evidence now. It was history. Evelyn moved directly to the far corner where an old tool chest sat beneath a hanging snow chain. Not the obvious drawers, not the main cabinet. Her fingers found a hidden latch beneath the underside. She pulled. A soft, mechanical click echoed in the stillness. The lower panel released. Inside was a long cedar box wrapped in oilcloth. Dust rose when she lifted it, 40 years of silence breaking open in her hands. She carried it to the workbench. Every biker in the room leaned closer. Even the villagers crowded the doorway. Evelyn laid the box down gently, then looked at Mason. He said the rider who stood between this house and greed would know what to do. Mason's jaw tightened. That described tonight too perfectly. He carefully opened the cedar lid. Inside lay 3 things. First, an old leather road captain's cut, black, heavy, perfectly preserved. Across the back, Harper, founder. The original winged skull crest stitched in red, silver, and white thread. A visible shock rolled through the riders. No replica, no museum patch, the actual founder cut. Ronan whispered, almost reverent, "Dear God." Second, a folded handwritten letter sealed in wax. Evelyn handed it to Mason. The wax broke with a dry snap. The handwriting inside was strong, deliberate, unmistakably written by a man who believed words should carry weight. Mason read aloud. "If this house stands under threat, then the road has brought the right rider." This land was never built for comfort. It was built for mercy. Whoever protects it now protects every rider who may one day need fire, fuel, and shelter. The Brotherhood is not leather. It is the hand that opens the door in winter. If greed ever returns, remind them whose road this is. Elias Harper. No one in the room breathed. Several older riders lowered their heads. A few of the townspeople quietly wiped tears, because the letter perfectly explained what Briar's End had forgotten. The Harper Ranch was never just a house. It was a promise. Then, Mason lifted the third item from the cedar box, a rolled county blueprint. He opened it across the workbench. Everyone crowded closer. The blueprint showed the ranch, the barn, the workshop, the North Winter Pass, the South Emergency Route fuel cache points, roadside shelter markers. And at the bottom, in Elias Harper's handwriting, Harper Winter Lodge, expansion plan capacity, 60 riders, emergency village shelter approved. Clara gasped from the doorway. He was planning this for the whole town. Walter Boone leaned in, voice trembling. In the winter of '85, we almost lost the school road. He must have been preparing a regional shelter. Evelyn touched the edge of the blueprint. He died before he could build the second wing. The room fell silent again. Now the real emotional shape of the story finally became clear. Dalton Reeves had tried to destroy what could have become the safest winter shelter in the county, not just for bikers, for everyone. Ronan looked at the blueprint, then at the town, then at the 80 riders outside. His expression shifted into something fierce and certain. "We finish it." Every head turned. Ronan stepped forward. This wasn't just Elias's house. This was his unfinished promise. He pointed to the blueprint. Second wing. Fuel shelter. Village emergency beds. Storm radio tower. Then he looked directly at Clara, Walter, and the gathered townspeople. "If Briar's End wants to make this right," Clara's answer came instantly. "We help build it," more voices followed. "I'll bring timber. My sons can clear the pass. We still have the old church cots. I know the county electrician. The school has spare heaters." The shift was total. The same town that once feared the Widow's Road now wanted to protect it, to build on it, to redeem it. Mason slowly lifted Elias Harper's founder cut from the cedar box. The leather was heavy in his hands. Legacy, weight, responsibility. He looked at Evelyn. Her eyes shimmered in the workshop lantern glow. "I think he knew this night would come," Mason said. A soft, sad smile touched her lips. "He always said winter reveals who people really are." Outside, dawn began to pale the storm clouds. The blizzard was breaking. Soft gold light touched the snowfields beyond the fence. The first morning Briar's End had seen the Harper Ranch clearly in 40 years. Then, Cole burst through the workshop door, breath steaming. "President?" Mason turned. Cole's face carried the kind of grin that only comes before something legendary. The Eastern chapters just arrived. Mason stepped outside, and what he saw made the night feel even bigger than justice. The road beyond the ranch was now filled with hundreds of Harleys stretching into sunrise, every chapter in Montana answering the founder's ground call. The storm had become a pilgrimage, and the whole state was coming to rebuild what greed failed to destroy. Dawn broke over Briar's End like a promise finally kept. The blizzard clouds had split into long silver ribbons across the Montana sky, and the first light of morning spilled over the Harper Ranch, turning every drift of snow into gold. And down the county road they came. Harleys, hundreds of them. Headlights stretched farther than Mason Creed could see, a river of chrome and leather rolling through the pale sunrise from every direction in the state. Eastern chapters, southern nomads, old winter riders from Helena, Bozeman, Red Lodge, Billings, even retired road captains who hadn't worn cuts in 20 years. The call had spread through the night faster than any official order ever could. Founder ground was under threat. The widow stood alone no more. Now the road answered. The sound hit the valley like thunder made holy. Villagers stepped out from trucks and porches, coffee cups forgotten in trembling hands as they watched the endless procession. Children stared in open wonder. Old ranchers removed their hats. Women wrapped tighter in coats and quietly cried. because what they were seeing was bigger than motorcycles. It was loyalty made visible. The first Eastern pack rolled into the yard and parked in perfect formation along the reopened south fence. At the front rode a woman in her late 60s with white braids and an old scar crossing one cheek. She dismounted, looked at the founder crest above the barn, then at Evelyn. Her face softened. "Ma'am." Evelyn stared. Recognition sparked. "Naomi?" The woman smiled. "Elias pulled me out of Miller's Gorge in the freeze of '81. A low ripple of awe moved through the villagers. One by one, more old riders stepped forward with stories. "He gave me chains outside Livingston. He patched my tank leak in a whiteout. He opened this barn to my brother in '79. This place saved our whole chapter one February." The Harper Ranch stopped feeling like a single-family property. It became what Elias had always meant it to be: a living monument, a road sanctuary, a covenant in timber and fire. Mason stood beside Ronan near the workshop, Elias's founder cut folded carefully over his arm. "You ever seen this many chapters answer one call?" Ronan gave a slow grin. "Not since Elias's funeral ride." That line hit hard, because now it felt like the founder himself had called them back. The villagers moved fast, too. Clara organized hot coffee tables beneath the porch awning. Walter Boone directed younger ranchers toward the damaged south ditch. The school custodian arrived with cots and spare blankets from the gym. By 7:30 in the morning, the Harper Ranch had transformed, not into a battlefield, into a work site. The unfinished blueprint from Elias's cedar box was spread across the farmhouse dining table. Mason, Ronan, Naomi. The state investigators, 3 village carpenters, and Evelyn herself, all standing around the plan. Mason pointed to the lower section. "The second wing goes here." The blueprint showed a long timber addition extending from the workshop toward the southern field. Rider cots, village storm beds, fuel reserve storage, emergency radio room. Naomi tapped the far corner. "We should reinforce the south wall with steel sheeting. If another blizzard hits, drifting snow will bury the lower windows." One of the carpenters nodded. "We still got old grain beam stock from the church rebuild," Clara added. "The school has backup generators." The state investigator, still reviewing county fraud records, looked up. "Under emergency protection status, the state can temporarily fund restoration as a historic rescue structure." That stunned the whole room. Evelyn blinked. "The state would help?" The older investigator nodded. "This site qualifies as protected humanitarian infrastructure." He glanced toward the founder ledger. "Frankly, it should have had this status decades ago." The shame in the villagers' faces returned, but this time it was mixed with purpose. Not guilt for the past, responsibility for what came next. Outside, dozens of riders were already clearing snow from the southern foundation line where Elias had planned the second wing. Spike chains were lifted, broken bulldozer debris hauled out, fence posts reset. Even the demolition crew that Dalton had hired quietly joined the labor. The foreman removed his county jacket and picked up a shovel. "I'm not proud of last night," he admitted to Mason, "but I can damn sure help fix what we almost broke." Mason handed him a timber post. "Then start there." By noon, the entire valley sounded different. No engines roaring in anger, no diesel intimidation, no lies. Just hammers, chainsaws, shovels, laughter, old road stories, village voices mixing with biker brotherhood. The Harper Ranch was becoming alive in a way it hadn't been since Elias's death. Evelyn stood near the porch rail, watching it all. The same road that once carried fear and rumor now carried lumber trucks, fuel trailers, and chapter riders bringing supplies. A boy from the village, maybe 12 years old, approached her nervously. "Mrs. Harper?" She turned. The boy held up an old rusted fuel can. "We found this buried by the fence," Evelyn smiled softly. "Elias used to stash those every quarter mile during bad winters." The boy's eyes widened. "So people wouldn't freeze?" "Yes." The boy looked toward the endless line of Harleys, then back at her. "My dad says this place should be called Harper Lodge." Evelyn's breath caught, the exact name on the blueprint. She looked toward the workshop window where the original plan still lay open. Somehow the founder's unfinished vision was building itself around her. Then Mason approached, carrying Elias's founder cut. He stopped beside her. Think it's time. Evelyn looked at the leather in his hands, the original cut, preserved 40 years, waiting for the rider who would protect the house. Mason held it out. No one wears this. Not as ownership. As guardianship. The riders gathering in the yard slowly turned toward them. The villagers, too. A sacred hush settled over Founder ground. Mason draped the Founder cut across the porch beam above the front door, right where every arriving rider would see it. A signal, a vow. This house stands. This road remains open. No rider dies in the cold. The entire ranch erupted into the deep thunder of Harley engines revving in unison. A salute, a promise, a legacy reborn. Evelyn closed her eyes as the sound rolled over the snowfields. For the first time in 40 years, the house no longer felt haunted by memory. It felt inhabited by purpose. Then the female state investigator approached with a folder, her expression serious. "Mrs. Harper, there's one last thing." Evelyn opened her eyes. "What now?" The investigator handed her a stamped legal packet. Dalton Reeves's commercial investors weren't acting alone. Mason stepped closer. Inside the file were corporate land maps, regional, expanded. The shopping center had only been phase 1. The real plan was bigger. A full highway expansion project designed to erase half the outer village, including the church, school road, and Walter Boone's ranch. The silence that followed was colder than the storm. Because now everyone understood. Dalton wasn't the end of the fight. He was just the first man to fall. The legal packet felt heavier than paper should. Mason took it from the investigator's hands and spread the new maps across the farmhouse table beside Elias Harper's original lodge blueprint. At first glance, it looked like standard county planning, road widening, tourist access, fuel contracts. Then Clara leaned closer and went pale. That line cuts through St. Michael's. The room fell silent. St. Michael's Church sat on the southern rise above Briar's End, built in 1898, the oldest standing structure in the valley, where half the town had been baptized, married, and buried their dead. The red route line on Dalton's investor map sliced directly through it. Walter Boone gripped the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "And that second route," his voice dropped, "that's my ranch." The female investigator nodded grimly. Phase 2 included village rezoning under emergency commercial expansion rights. Mason's jaw tightened. This was no shopping center. This was eradication. The investors wanted the whole valley. The Harper Ranch had simply been the key access point, the domino that made the rest possible. Naomi traced the route line farther north. "School Road, too," Clara whispered, horrified. They were going to cut the school off from the Winter Pass. Now the full shape of the conspiracy came into focus. Dalton Reeves hadn't been planning development. He had been planning replacement, erase. The church, the old school route the ranchland's founder ground every family property standing in the way of corporate highway money. And because Briar's End had spent decades isolated by rumor and controlled by fear, no one had looked close enough to stop it. Until tonight. Evelyn stared at the maps for a long time. Then she said something so quietly, the whole room leaned closer. His father said the same thing in 1986. Mason turned. "What?" Evelyn's eyes stayed on the route lines. "He came here after Elias died with men in suits and survey stakes. He told me the valley would belong to Progress." Her voice hardened. But Elias already knew. She moved toward the workshop. Everyone followed. Inside, she went to the old cedar chest again, not the hidden latch this time, but the false bottom beneath the original blueprints. She lifted another oilcloth packet, smaller, older, tied with twine. When she opened it, dozens of survey photos spilled across the workbench, black and white aerial shots, hand-marked route lines, village boundaries. At the center, a note in Elias Harper's unmistakable handwriting. "If they ever widen the South Pass, they'll come for the valley next. Protect the church road first." Clara covered her mouth. Walter Boone looked like he'd been punched in the chest. He knew. Ronan let out a long breath. Founder didn't just build a shelter. He built a defense plan. Mason studied the old photos. Elias had mapped alternate winter routes around every critical village landmark: school, church, ranch, waterline, cemetery road, emergency south bridge. He had anticipated corporate expansion 40 years before it reached them. The room filled with a kind of awe deeper than respect. Elias Harper hadn't simply been a road captain, he had been a guardian of the valley itself. The female investigator turned to Mason. These maps are enough to freeze the entire investor project. Good. But Mason's instincts were already moving ahead. Paper wins courts. It doesn't always win towns. And Briar's End needed something stronger than legal survival. It needed unity. Outside, the sound of rebuilding continued. Hammers, timber chains, engines, laughter. The valley was alive. Mason stepped onto the porch and looked over what the Harper Ranch had become by midday. More than 200 Harleys now lined the outer road. The second wing foundation was already half cleared. Villagers and riders worked side by side. And for the first time, the church bell rang from the southern rise. St. Michael's, slow, clear, powerful. Walter Boone stepped beside him, tears freezing in the corners of his eyes. That bell hasn't rung in winter for 15 years. Mason glanced over. Walter looked toward the church hill. Mercer kept claiming the road was too dangerous to clear. Another lie. Another piece of the valley intentionally starved. Mason exhaled slowly. This was bigger than Founder Ground now. This was an entire town being returned to itself. Then, Naomi climbed the porch steps fast. Her expression was sharp. "We got movement on the South Highway." Mason turned immediately. "What kind?" "Corporate trucks. Black SUVs. Private security." The investigator came outside behind them and checked the map packet. Her face darkened. "That'll be Northridge Development. The real investors, the people behind Dalton, the money that expected this valley to roll over. They had finally arrived in person. And, unlike the mayor, they wouldn't come with local lies. They would come with contracts, lawyers, pressure, security men in clean coats, a different kind of war. The road beyond the village began to fill with dark vehicles. 10, maybe 12. The kind of convoy rich men send when they still believe money can outmuscle memory. The villagers noticed too. Work slowed, people turned, fear tried to return. Mason saw it immediately. This was the real test, not exposure. Standing. He turned toward the Harleys lining Founder Ground, then toward St. Michael's bell tower visible over the snowy ridge, then back to the town. His voice carried across the ranch. "Everybody keep building." The order snapped the valley back into motion. Hammers resumed, shovels moved, chainsaws roared, engines idled low. No panic, no surrender, just purpose. Ronan grinned beside him. "That's the founder's answer." Mason nodded. "If they want the valley." He looked at the endless riders, the villagers, the unfinished Harper Lodge wing, and the church bell still echoing through the snow. "They're going to face everyone Elias ever protected." The convoy of black SUVs turned off the highway and started climbing toward Briar's End. The real power behind 40 years of corruption was finally coming to collect. And this time, the whole valley would be waiting. The convoy climbed the South Highway like a line of black teeth. 12 SUVs, 2 long executive trucks, a private plow clearing the way in front. No county decals, no town plates. This wasn't Briar's End corruption anymore. This was corporate power. Northridge Development had arrived, the money behind Dalton Reeves. The reason Sheriff Mercer spent 40 years starving roads, the reason Evelyn Harper had been turned into a ghost, the reason St. Michael's, Walter Boone's ranch, and the school road all sat under red lines on stolen maps. Now the people who believed they owned the valley were finally coming to look it in the eye. The black vehicles rolled to a slow stop at the southern rise, where the village road opened into the Harper Ranch. And what they saw waiting for them was not the broken little town Dalton promised. It was a united wall of steel, timber, and memory. Hundreds of Harleys lined both sides of Founder Ground, engines idling like low thunder. Villagers stood shoulder to shoulder beside them, ranchers, teachers, church families, the school custodian lumber crews, the old demolition workers now carrying tools instead of contracts. Behind them rose the Harper Ranch itself, porch lantern burning Founder cut above the door, second wing foundation taking shape, St. Michael's bell still ringing through the valley. This wasn't resistance anymore. This was a people remembering who they were. The first SUV door opened. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out, late 60s, silver hair slicked back, polished boots too expensive for snow. Beside him came a woman with a leather briefcase and 3 men in black winter tactical jackets, lawyers, security, executives. The man surveyed the ranch with visible irritation. Then his eyes found Evelyn Harper on the porch. His expression tightened. Mrs. Harper. His voice carried the smoothness of boardrooms and television interviews. My name is Victor Sloan, CEO of Northridge Development, the villagers murmured. Even the name carried weight. Outside money, big state influence, the kind of man who buys counties by shaking the right hands. Victor spread his gloved hands. This situation has clearly become emotional, Clara muttered. Emotional. Walter Boone spat into the snow. Mason stepped down from the porch and stopped halfway between the ranch and the SUVs. Funny word for 40 years of fraud. Victor didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on Evelyn. Mrs. Harper, Mayor Reeves exceeded his authority. That is unfortunate. But the regional expansion project remains lawful. The female state investigator stepped forward immediately. Not with these protected route maps, it isn't. Victor finally looked at her. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Then vanished. People like him don't panic. They negotiate until pressure breaks weaker people. He looked around at the town. The valley needs jobs. Tourism, revenue, medical access, new schools. The lies were cleaner than Dalton's, more expensive, wrapped in polished logic. And for a moment, Mason saw the danger, not fear, temptation, the kind of temptation that makes struggling towns sell their roots for promises. Victor pointed toward St. Michael's Hill. We can rebuild the church better, modernize the school, compensate every ranch owner generously. There it was, the real weapon. Comfort, buy memory, buy land, buy silence. Then Evelyn Harper walked off the porch. No lantern now, no shotgun, just the founder deed in one hand and Elias's unfinished lodge blueprint in the other. The whole valley watched her cross the snow, 80 years old, silver braid, straight back, walking through the exact land they spent 40 years trying to take. She stopped 10 feet from Victor Sloan. Her voice came quiet. My husband built emergency shelter here because storms kill. She lifted the blueprint. He planned to expand it for the village. Then the deed. You wanted to replace it with hotels and parking lots? Victor's smile stayed fixed. We want progress. Evelyn looked around at the people rebuilding the second wing, at villagers and riders working side by side, at children carrying wood, at church volunteers hauling cots, at old ranchers resetting fence lines. Then she answered with the line that changed the valley forever. This is progress. The silence after that felt sacred, because everyone standing there knew she was right. Progress wasn't concrete, it was protection, memory, community, a shelter finished instead of erased. Victor's expression finally hardened. This project has state-level investors and federal route incentives. The female investigator opened her case. Not anymore. She held up the signed emergency freeze order. Northridge's entire south expansion corridor is suspended pending criminal review. Every survey tied to Dalton Reeves is now evidence. Victor's eyes narrowed. For the first time, the executive lost control of the room. Mason stepped beside Evelyn. Behind him, the Harleys revved low. Not a threat. A reminder. This valley wasn't for sale anymore. Victor scanned the endless line of riders, the villagers, the founder cut hanging over the porch, the church bell tower, the state investigators, and finally, the half-built Harper Lodge wing. The math changed behind his eyes. Too expensive, too public, too symbolic. The corporate man finally understood what Dalton never did. Some land can't be bought once people wake up. He exhaled once through his nose, then turned to his lawyer. We withdraw. The words hit the valley like sunlight after weeks of storm. Clara cried first, then Walter, then half the village. Because the threat hanging over Briar's End for 40 years had just stepped backward. Victor Sloan got into the SUV without another word. The convoy slowly turned around and rolled back toward the South Highway. Gone. No bulldozers, no seizure, no expansion, no parking lot future, just retreat. The entire valley erupted, not chaos, joy. Church bells rang harder, Harleys thundered in salute, hammers resumed, children laughed. Mason looked toward the workshop, where Elias Harper's unfinished blueprint still lay on the table. Then toward the rising second wing. Then toward the people filling the valley with life. The real story had never been about corruption. It had been about whether memory could outlast greed. Tonight, it had. Evelyn stepped beside him. Her eyes glistened in the pale winter sun. He won. Mason looked at her. Who? She smiled toward the founder crest over the barn. Elias. Then St. Michael's bell rang again. Slow, strong, clear. And every person in Briar's End understood the same truth. The house they tried to erase had become the heart of the valley. By noon, the valley no longer looked like the place Dalton Reeves had tried to sell. Briar's End was alive. The snowfields around the Harper Ranch had transformed into a moving tapestry of people, machines, timber, and brotherhood. Everywhere Mason looked, something was being restored. Fence posts rose from the drifts like reclaimed history. Fresh beams were carried toward the southern foundation trench where Elias Harper's second wing, left unfinished for 40 years, was finally taking shape. The church bell rang every half hour now, not as warning, but as celebration. And the road that had once carried fear now carried supply trucks, lumber from the old mill, heaters from the school, cots from St. Michael's basement, fuel barrels from 3 biker chapters, a radio mast donated by a retired highway patrolman who remembered Elias from the blizzard of '79. The Harper Ranch had become exactly what the founder intended, a shelter, a lodge, a promise made real. Mason stood near the new foundation line with Ronan and Naomi, studying the blueprint spread over the hood of a pickup truck. The second wing frame was already outlined in fresh chalk and timber stakes. Naomi tapped the far western corner. We can extend the storm bunks by another 12 feet if we reinforce with church beam stock. One of the village carpenters nodded. That gives us 20 more beds, Ronan grinned. Founder planned for 60. We're taking it to 80. Mason looked toward the line of Harleys parked in long rows around the valley. Hundreds still remained. Nobody had rushed home. Nobody treated the night as mission accomplished, because every rider there understood they weren't just defending a widow anymore. They were building sacred ground. Across the yard, Evelyn Harper stood near the porch rail speaking with Clara and Walter Boone. For the first time in the story, there was peace in the way she moved. No guarded posture, no loneliness in her shoulders, no sense of waiting for the next knock from men who wanted her gone. The town had come back to her. More importantly, she had come back to the town. A little girl from the village, maybe 8 years old, approached Evelyn holding a hand-painted sign. The board was crooked and clearly homemade. Across it in blue paint, Harper Lodge, no one freezes here. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile. The kind grief doesn't allow for decades. Clara touched her arm. That should hang over the second wing. Evelyn nodded softly. Yes. Mason watched that moment and understood something deeper than victory. The real healing had nothing to do with Dalton's arrest or Victor Sloan's retreat. It was this, the town choosing a new story. Not crazy widow, cursed road, haunted ranch, but protector, shelter, legacy. By early afternoon, the state investigators returned from Briar's End Courthouse with new documents. The female investigator climbed out holding a sealed legal folder. Her face was different this time, almost warm. Mrs. Harper. Evelyn stepped down from the porch. The investigator handed her the folder. Full historical restoration grant. Emergency route preservation status. And one more thing. She pulled out a second document, a brass-embossed plaque authorization. Harper Winter Lodge, founder Elias Harper, Memorial Shelter, State Historical Protection. The entire porch fell silent. Walter Boone removed his hat. Clara wiped tears. Even Mason had to breathe slower. Because now, Elias Harper's promise would outlive rumor, corruption, and even the people standing there. Protected in law, protected in memory, protected in steel and snow. The villagers gathered as the plaque was mounted beside the front porch beam under the founder cut. The bell rang from St. Michael's the moment the screws went in. A perfect sound. like the valley itself was blessing the house. Then, one of the younger riders, Cole, jogged over from the outer road. "President," Mason turned. Cole was grinning. "You need to see this." At the edge of the south field, where Dalton's bulldozer had snapped its track the night before, the riders had already cleared the wreck and repurposed the steel. Now the twisted track links had been forged into something new, a great iron arch frame, the original winged skull founder crest welded into the center. Below it, in steel lettering, "No rider dies in the cold." Ronan let out a slow laugh. "Hell of a gate," Naomi touched the welded crest. "That should be the road entrance." And within minutes, dozens of bikers and villagers were hauling the arch into place at the main entrance to the Harper property. The very place Dalton intended to run commercial trucks through. Now it became a sacred threshold, a gateway to mercy. As the gate was raised, children from the village gathered beneath it and stared upward like it was some ancient monument. In a way, it was. Not ancient in years, ancient in meaning. A lie had stood there for 40 years. Now, truth stood taller. Late that afternoon, Mason finally entered the workshop alone. The room was quieter now, still full of oil scent, old tools, cedar, and the faint warmth of the stove. Elias Harper's founder cut still hung over the front porch, but his presence felt strongest here. At the workbench lay the unfinished motorcycle tank with the half-etched crest. Mason ran a thumb over the steel, then noticed something new. A folded page tucked beneath the vice clamp. He opened it. A single line in Elias's handwriting, likely overlooked in the night's chaos. "The road is only as strong as the people willing to keep it open." Mason stood there for a long moment. Outside, he could hear hammers, laughter, Harley engines, the church bell children running in snow. The road was open again, not just physically, spiritually, emotionally. A valley once isolated by lies had reconnected through one winter night of truth. Mason stepped back outside. The sunset was turning the snowfields orange and red. Harper Lodge's second wing frame now stood high enough to cast a long shadow across the valley. The villagers and riders gathered naturally in the yard, drawn by the warmth of porch lights and the smell of stew from Clara's church kitchen. Then Evelyn stepped onto the porch, holding Elias's founder letter. Her voice carried gently into the winter dusk. This house was built for mercy. Everyone quieted. She looked at the valley, at the town, at the endless Harleys, at the new gate, at the unfinished second wing. Then she smiled. "And tomorrow, we finish what he started." The entire yard answered with the thunder of Harley engines rolling into the Montana night. Not war drums this time. Homecoming. Morning came bright and mercilessly clear. The storm had finally broken for good. Sunlight spilled over the Montana Valley in long golden bands, catching on chrome, fresh timber, and the new iron gate at the entrance to the Harper property. "No rider dies in the cold." The steel letters burned in the morning light like law. Beyond it, Harper Lodge no longer looked like an isolated widow's ranch. It looked like the heart of a living community. The second wing frame now stood fully raised. Fresh beams crossed overhead. Roof trusses were already going up. The south wall had been reinforced with church beam stock and salvaged steel from Dalton's destroyed bulldozer. Every hammer strike felt symbolic. The valley wasn't just repairing a building, it was correcting 40 years of silence. Mason Creed stood near the fresh lumber stacks with Naomi and 2 village carpenters, studying the final roofline. "Storm bunks on the west wall," Naomi said. "Village cots east side. Fuel reserve locked behind steel." One carpenter nodded. "And we can run the radio mast wiring through the loft." Perfect. Exactly what Elias Harper had intended. Ronan Vance walked up carrying a mug of black coffee. The old Western president looked around at the worksite and let out a low whistle. "I haven't seen this much honest labor in one place since the spring flood rebuild in Livingston." Mason smirked. "This one means more." Ronan followed his gaze toward Evelyn. She stood near the porch, speaking with St. Michael's pastor, Father Donnelly, and 3 women from the church committee. They were discussing winter food storage, medical cots, and rotating shelter volunteers. Even now, Evelyn's mind was already moving beyond survival. She wasn't thinking about last night anymore. She was thinking about every storm still to come. That was the difference between being rescued and becoming a protector. Then a pickup truck rolled through the new iron gate, old red Ford, county plates, the entire yard subtly tensed, not fear, habit. Too many bad men had arrived in official vehicles. But when the driver stepped out, Walter Boone actually smiled. Tommy Reeves. The whole yard went still. Tommy Reeves, Dalton's younger brother, early 50s, the black sheep who'd left Briar's End 20 years ago after a family fallout nobody liked talking about. He climbed out slowly, hands visible, face worn by guilt and old distance. His eyes landed first on Evelyn, then the founder cut above the porch, then the second wing. He exhaled like the sight physically hurt. I heard what Dalton did. The villagers exchanged uncertain looks. Bloodline still mattered in small towns, even when the wrong brother wore it. Tommy stepped closer through the snow. My father started this land war after Elias died. No one interrupted. The truth had a weight to it now. People made room for it. Tommy pulled a weathered metal lockbox from the truck bed and set it on the porch steps. I took this from my father's office the night I left town. He looked directly at Evelyn. I should have brought it back years ago. The silence deepened, because everybody knew instinctively this was old truth, dangerous truth. Tommy opened the box. Inside were original county council transcripts, private land board notes, letters from Thomas Reeves to early investors, handwritten legal drafts for the first truck stop seizure attempt in 1986, and on top, a signed confession letter from Thomas Reeves himself. Walter Boone breathed out, stunned. Sweet Lord. The female state investigator, still on site with the restoration team, stepped forward immediately and began scanning the pages. Her eyes sharpened. This confirms generational conspiracy. Tommy nodded bitterly. My father knew the Harper land could never legally be seized. He looked at the half-built lodge, so he chose fear instead. Evelyn stared at the confession for a long time. No tears, no rage, just the final click of understanding. Every cruel rumor, every sheriff visit, every zoning scare, every lost church road, every year of loneliness, planned, engineered, inherited. Dalton hadn't invented evil. He'd continued family tradition. Tommy's voice lowered. I left because I couldn't become him. That line changed how the villagers looked at him. Not Dalton's brother, a man who walked away from corruption before it swallowed him. The investigator closed the file. With this, Northridge loses any legal standing forever. A slow wave of relief moved through the yard. Not just victory, finality. The war was truly over. But Tommy wasn't done. He looked toward the southern rise where St. Michael's bell tower stood over the valley. Then, back to Evelyn. My father hid one more thing. He reached deeper into the lockbox and pulled out a faded photograph. The whole porch leaned closer. The photo showed Elias Harper, Thomas Reeves, Walter Boone's father, St. Michael's original priest, the first village road crew standing together beside the unfinished Harper Ranch in 1974. Smiling, brothers in labor. The whole town gasped, because it meant the valley had once been united, before greed, before investors, before rumor poisoned memory. Thomas Reeves had once helped build the very place his family later tried to destroy. Walter stared at the photo, voice rough. We all built this together. Evelyn touched the image softly. Yes. That single photo became the emotional heart of the morning, proof that Briar's End's original identity had always been cooperation, not fear. The lie had never been the town, only the men who twisted it. By midday, the second wing roof was nearly complete. St. Michael's volunteers installed the first row of cots. The radio tower mast was raised, fuel lockers were secured. Village children painted wooden storm signs for the road. One sign read, Harper Lodge, winter safe route. Another, fuel, fire, shelter, medical. The place was no longer just a biker sanctuary. It had become the valley's emergency heart. Late afternoon brought the final symbolic moment. Tommy Reeves approached the iron gate carrying his father's old council gavel from the lockbox. He looked at Mason. Mind if we end this properly? Mason nodded. Together, Tommy and Walter walked to the new entrance arch. At the base of the steel post, Tommy buried the gavel in frozen earth beneath the words, "No rider dies in the cold." The old corrupt authority of the Reeves bloodline was literally buried beneath Elias's code. The whole yard stood in silence as the snow covered the disturbed patch of ground. Then St. Michael's bell rang once, long, clear, final. That chapter of the valley was over. As sunset turned the snow crimson, Mason looked over Harper Lodge. Second wing nearly complete, church cots installed, village volunteers cooking inside, hundreds of Harleys still standing guard, and Evelyn Harper on the porch, no longer a ghost on the edge of town. Now she looked exactly what she truly was, the keeper of the valley. Then Clara hurried up the porch steps holding a phone. "Evelyn," the old widow turned. Clara's face carried stunned disbelief. "It's the governor's office." The whole porch went silent, because now the story had grown bigger than the valley. The words hit the porch harder than the blizzard ever had. "It's the governor's office." For a second, nobody moved. The late Montana sun burned red across the snowfields, painting Harper Lodge's rising second wing in gold and crimson. Hammers had slowed. The church volunteers on the porch steps turned. Even the Harley engines idling along the outer road seemed to settle into a lower, expectant rumble. Evelyn Harper took the phone from Clara with both hands. At 80 years old, after 40 years of lies, isolation, and men in power trying to erase her husband's legacy, it was almost surreal to hear the state's highest office reaching into the valley. She lifted the phone to her ear. "This is Evelyn." A warm, measured female voice answered. "Mrs. Harper, this is Governor Helen Ward's chief of staff. The governor has been briefed on the Briar's End land fraud investigation and the emergency shelter restoration." The entire porch leaned closer without meaning to. The staffer continued. "The governor would like to personally designate Harper Lodge as a state winter emergency sanctuary and historical memorial route site." Silence. Then Clara gasped. Walter Boone removed his hat. Even Mason let out a slow breath. Because this was bigger than protection. This was permanence. The staffer's voice continued. "Additionally, the governor wants the old South Pass Road formally renamed in Elias Harper's honor." Evelyn's eyes closed. For just a moment, a lifetime of grief, loyalty, winters, and lonely porch lanterns passing behind her expression. When she opened them again, the snow in the valley looked different somehow, lighter. "He'd like that," she said softly. The staffer laughed gently. "We think the whole state will." When the call ended, Evelyn lowered the phone. Nobody asked what was said. They could read it in her face. Clara whispered first. "What happened?" Evelyn looked toward the iron gate, toward the steel founder words, "No rider dies in the cold," then at the unfinished second wing, the village, the Harleys, St. Michael's bell tower. Finally she spoke. "The governor is making this sanctuary state protected." The valley exploded, not chaos, pure joy. The church bell rang. Harleys thundered in salute. Children shouted. The carpenters on the roof actually whooped loud enough to echo across the frozen plains. Walter Boone wiped his eyes openly now. "Elias just became part of Montana history." Ronan Vance laughed beside Mason. "Hell, he already was." The female state investigator climbed the porch with fresh paperwork in hand, smiling for the first time since arriving. "This speeds everything up." She opened the folder. Inside, immediate sanctuary designation state-funded winter rescue grant, permanent highway emergency route markers, fuel reserve, replenishment contracts, church road restoration funds, school winter plow, priority village radio tower licensing. The valley wasn't just saved, it was about to thrive. Naomi spread the new state maps across the porch railing. The updated route lines no longer cut through St. Michael's Walters Ranch or the school road. Instead, every route now radiated through Harper Lodge as the protected emergency hub, exactly as Elias Harper had envisioned decades ago. Clara looked over the plans, stunned. "This changes everything," Mason nodded. "For the whole county." Because now Briar's End wouldn't be remembered as Forgotten Valley, Cursed Widow, Road-Failed Winter Route. It would become the safest storm corridor in Montana, a place where stranded travelers, truckers, school buses, and riders could survive the worst winter nights. The exact opposite of what Greed had tried to build. As the afternoon deepened, the governor's office sent a press team and state road planners to document the site. The villagers were nervous at first. Cameras had been tools of shame under Dalton's rule. Now, they became witnesses to truth. The first state photographer stopped under the Founder Gate and slowly took in the site. Hundreds of Harley's St. Michael's bell ringing the half-finished second wing, children carrying blankets, Clara's church kitchen line feeding riders and villagers together. Evelyn standing under Elias's Founder cut, he lowered the camera and whispered, "This is the most human thing I've seen all year." By sunset, state crews had already begun installing official winter emergency signs along the county road, bright reflective markers, Harper Pass, State Sanctuary Route Emergency Fuel. 2 miles shelter open in storm conditions. The whole valley watched the first sign go into frozen earth, a legal promise made visible. Walter Boone looked at Mason. For 40 years, the road signs warned people away. Mason watched the new marker catch the sunset. Now they lead people home. That line stayed with everyone. As darkness settled, Harper Lodge glowed brighter than ever before. The new second wing roof was finished, interior cots lined the walls, medical cabinets were stocked, fuel lockers sealed, the radio mast blinked red against the winter sky. The lodge was operational. Not almost, not someday, tonight. And almost as if the valley wanted to test the promise immediately, a snow squall rolled over the northern ridge just after dusk. Not a full blizzard, just enough to hide the upper pass. At 8:17 p.m., the new radio mast crackled alive for the first time. A truck driver's voice, broken, cold, relieved. "Anyone copy? Fuel line froze, 3 miles north of St. Michael's Bend." The entire lodge turned toward the radio. Evelyn smiled. The first real call. Mason reached for the mic, but Evelyn gently placed her hand over his. No, she looked toward the yard where dozens of Harleys still stood ready. "This one belongs to the valley." Walter Boone stepped forward. "So does my truck." Naomi grabbed winter chains. Ronan called for 6 riders. Clara packed thermoses and blankets. The church volunteers moved medical supplies. No hesitation, no confusion. The system Elias dreamed of was already alive. Within 4 minutes, 1 ranch truck, 6 Harleys, fuel canisters, emergency blankets, medical kit church volunteers rolled through the Founder Gate into the rising snow. The whole valley watched them go. The first rescue mission launched from Harper Lodge. Evelyn stood beneath the Founder cut as the engines disappeared into the dark. Tears shone in her eyes, but this time they weren't grief. They were fulfillment. "He finished it," she whispered. Mason stood beside her. "No." He looked toward the rescue team lights vanishing into the pass. "We did." St. Michael's bell rang once into the night, not as warning, as blessing. And for the first time in 40 years, the valley no longer feared winter. It was ready for it. The rescue team's headlights vanished into the rising snow like fireflies swallowed by the mountain. For a long moment, everyone at Harper Lodge stood in silence beneath the Founder Gate, watching the red taillights fade into the northern pass. The first official rescue. Launched less than 12 hours after the lodge's rebirth. Not symbolic. Real. The kind Elias Harper had built this place for. Evelyn stood beneath the Founder cut over the porch, one hand resting lightly on the timber beam as St. Michael's bell gave one slow blessing note across the valley. The sound seemed to settle over everything. The fresh winter signs, the finished second wing, the church volunteers moving inside the Harleys, idling low like watchful animals in the snow. The valley had changed, not just legally, not just emotionally, operationally, alive. Inside the new radio room, Clara Ellison adjusted the signal board while the retired highway patrolman finished locking the final wiring panel into place. The mast light blinked red through the dark. Steady, reliable, a pulse over the valley. The female state investigator, still on site with the restoration grant team, looked over the completed emergency shelter forms. "I've worked disaster zones for 12 years, she admitted. "I've never seen a community go from collapse to functional rescue hub in a single day." Mason leaned against the doorway, watching the radio equipment hum. "That's because this wasn't built in a day." He glanced toward Evelyn through the glass. She's been holding the foundation for 40 years. That line stayed with everyone in the room, because it was true. The wood, the land, the maps, the codes, those were structures. But the real foundation had always been Evelyn, her lantern, her fuel cans, her refusal to leave, her choice to keep the road alive even while the town feared her. Now, all of it had finally found shape. At 9:04 p.m., the radio crackled again, Walter Boone's voice. "Harper Lodge, this is Boone Rescue 1. Clara immediately reached for the mic. "Go ahead, Walter," Static hissed. Then, "Found the trucker at St. Michael's Bend. Fuel line frozen solid. Mild hypothermia. 1 passenger. Teenage daughter. Both stable." The entire lodge exhaled. The girl from the church kitchen clasped her hands to her chest. A father and daughter. Exactly the kind of rescue that turns buildings into legend. Walter continued. "Naomi's crew warming them now. We'll bring them back in 15. Evelyn closed her eyes for a second. A soft smile touched her lips. The lodge had just saved its first family. Outside, the snow intensified, swirling across the new iron gate and the freshly installed state sanctuary signs. Not a full blizzard, but enough to make the valley understand something powerful. Without Harper Lodge, those 2 people might have become another winter tragedy. Instead, they were on their way to warmth. At 9:22 p.m., the rescue convoy returned. The truck driver was in his 40s, face pale from cold, wrapped in 3 church blankets and sitting in Walter's passenger seat. Beside him, his daughter, maybe 16, clutched a thermos of Clara's coffee in trembling hands. The moment they rolled through the gate, the whole yard moved. Church volunteers, riders, village women, medical team. No hesitation. The girl looked around in shock at the sight. Hundreds of Harleys, the glowing lodge, the founder gate, the church bell tower, the villagers waiting like family. Her father could barely speak. "I thought we were done for." Walter helped him down gently. "You hit the right road." The daughter stared up at the founder gate. "What is this place?" Clara smiled. "It's the place winter loses." The line spread fast through the gathered people. Someone repeated it, then another. Within minutes, riders were saying it near the fuel lockers, church volunteers at the stove, children near the cots. A phrase had been born, the kind every legendary place eventually earns, the place winter loses. Inside the second wing, the rescued pair were settled into fresh cots under thick wool blankets. Naomi checked the father's hands for frostbite while Father Donnelly brought hot soup. The daughter sat up enough to look around. "I've never seen people help strangers like this." Evelyn sat beside her. Her voice was soft. "They're only strangers until the storm hits." That line hit Mason harder than any confrontation in the story, because it captured everything: brotherhood, village, mercy, Elias's code, the whole reason the lodge mattered. Around midnight, the governor's office called again, this time directly to the radio room. The chief of staff's voice carried clear over the line. "Mrs. Harper, news of the first rescue has already reached Helena." Clara actually laughed in disbelief. "Already," the staffer continued. "The governor wants Harper Lodge used as the pilot model for every winter emergency corridor in western Montana." The room went silent, because the story had just expanded beyond Briar's End, beyond the county, beyond the state plaque. Elias Harper's unfinished idea was about to reshape winter rescue routes across Montana. Mason looked toward the founder blueprint hanging beside the radio wall. The second wing, the storm bunks, the fuel lockers, the radio mast. What began as one widow defending her husband's house had become a model for saving lives statewide. Evelyn listened quietly, then answered with the kind of grace only she could bring. "If it keeps people from freezing, use every board we built." The chief of staff laughed warmly. "I think that's exactly what the governor hoped you'd say." After the call ended, the lodge settled into its first true operational night. Some riders finally slept on the cots they had helped install. Others rotated watch at the gate. Church volunteers organized breakfast supplies for morning. Walter updated the new route board with the first completed rescue mark. A single red pin, St. Michael's Bend, the beginning of the lodge's living map. Near 1 a.m., Mason stepped outside alone. The snow had softened into a quiet drift under moonlight. The iron gate stood tall. The founder cut moved gently in the wind above the porch. The second wing glowed warm behind fresh glass, and the road beyond the valley, once feared for decades, now carried a clear illuminated sign: Harper Pass, open during storm conditions. He heard footsteps behind him. Evelyn. She stood beside him in the moonlit snow. For a while, neither spoke. Then she looked toward the glowing lodge windows and whispered, "He never got to see this." Mason followed her gaze. No. He looked at the rescued father and daughter sleeping safely inside. But every life this place saves, he'll be in it. Evelyn's eyes glistened. St. Michael's bell gave one soft midnight note, and for the first time since Elias Harper died, the valley slept warm under a storm. By sunrise, Harper Lodge no longer felt new. It felt inevitable, the kind of place that makes people wonder how they ever survived without it. The snowstorm that had brushed the valley overnight now drifted in pale ribbons across the lower roads, but inside the lodge, everything moved with practiced rhythm. Coffee steamed from Clara's church kitchen line. The radio mast blinked steady over the ridge. Fuel reserves were logged. Walter Boone updated the rescue board with route conditions. Naomi and the Western chapter rotated storm patrol maps, and in the east bunkroom, the truck driver and his daughter slept warm beneath St. Michael's donated quilts. The first lives officially saved by Harper Lodge, the beginning of the legend. Mason Creed stood in the radio room with the state logistics officer reviewing the governor's pilot proposal. A fresh statewide winter map covered the wall now. Colored route lines spread out from Briar's End like arteries: Northridge, South Pass Church Road, School Bend Interstate Rescue Feeder routes, and next to Harper Lodge in red ink, Model Site A, State Replication. The officer tapped the map. If the governor signs the expansion package, this design gets duplicated in 6 counties before next winter. Mason looked toward the founder blueprint hanging beside it. Elias Harper's second wing plan: fuel lockers, storm bunks, radio relay mast, a design drawn by hand in 1984, about to become the blueprint for half the state. Outside, the valley was already waking. Supply trucks from Helena arrived carrying emergency generators, medical lockers, thermal blankets, road salt reserves, modular radio repeaters, official state route signs. The villagers stood in awe as workers unloaded equipment under the founder gate. Walter Boone laughed softly. "For 40 years we couldn't get one plow on time," Clara smirked. "Turns out all we needed was the truth." That line carried through the yard like warmth. Truth had become infrastructure. The rescued truck driver emerged from the bunk wing just after 8. His hands were bandaged but steady. His daughter, Lucy, walked beside him carrying a mug of coffee twice the size of her face. The girl stopped under the founder cut above the porch and looked up at the words etched into the new lodge plaque. Harper Winter Lodge. "No one freezes here," she turned to Evelyn. "Can we come back in summer?" The whole porch laughed. Evelyn smiled. "You won't need us in summer." Lucy shook her head. "I know. I just want to." That hit everyone harder than expected, because the lodge had already become more than emergency shelter. It had become a place people wanted to return to, a place associated with survival, kindness, and impossible warmth in the middle of winter. The truck driver stepped closer to Mason. "I run freight through 3 states. His voice was still rough from cold. "I'm putting Harper Pass on every driver board I know." Now the effect widened again. Truckers, long-haul routes, night freight networks. The road Elias built was about to become known far beyond Montana riders. By mid-morning, state press crews returned with regional news teams, satellite vans parked beside rows of Harleys. Reporters stood under the founder gate, microphones in gloved hands, telling the story now spreading across the entire Northwest. A state anchor looked directly into camera. What began as an 80-year-old widow saving stranded bikers in a deadly blizzard has become a statewide model for winter emergency response. The villagers listened from the porch in disbelief. Their little valley, their forgotten road, now on state television. Father Donnelly rang St. Michael's bell 3 times in celebration. Inside the workshop, Mason found Evelyn standing alone before Elias's unfinished motorcycle tank. The half-etched founder crest gleamed in the morning light. She ran her fingers gently over the steel. He always wanted to finish this bike. Mason stepped beside her. What stopped him? Evelyn's smile carried old sorrow, but lighter now. The Valley Blizzard of '84. The one where he started drawing the second wing. She touched the founder blueprint pinned nearby. He chose the shelter over the bike. Mason looked at the tank for a long moment, then toward the open workshop doors where the whole valley now moved in unity. He made the right call. Evelyn nodded. Yes? And now both get finished. That line changed Mason's whole expression. The unfinished bike, the last untouched piece of Elias Harper's legacy, a symbol powerful enough to close the emotional arc. He stepped outside and called to Cole. Get the best mechanics from every chapter. Cole grinned instantly. Oh, that's happening. Within the hour, 12 veteran builders gathered in the workshop. Old chapter mechanics, retired racers, Walter Boone's nephew from the farm shop, even the demolition foreman, who turned out to be a gifted welder. The unfinished founder bike became the Valley's next shared mission. Not because it needed to ride, because it needed to exist. A final piece of Elias's story made whole. By noon, the radio crackled again. Another call. A school bus stranded near the upper church bend. Minor slide, no injuries, 22 children aboard. The entire lodge shifted instantly into motion. Not panic, system. Walter to the truck. Naomi's chapter to escort. Church volunteers readying cocoa and blankets. The new state plow dispatch rerouted through Harper Pass. Medical wing prepared. The governor's logistics officer stared in disbelief. This place has been open less than a day. Clara handed him a thermos. Mercy scales fast. The rescue convoy rolled out beneath the founder gate, Harley escort lights flashing across fresh snow. The children arrived 40 minutes later, laughing, cold, and thrilled to be surrounded by hundreds of motorcycles. Lucy, the trucker's daughter, helped hand out blankets. Already part of the lodge, already part of the story. One little boy pointed at the founder crest over the porch. Is this where winter loses? The entire yard went quiet. Then Mason smiled. Yes. That phrase was spreading too. Drivers, children, news anchors, villagers. A myth being born in real time. By late afternoon, the school district superintendent arrived in person. He stood under the founder gate with tears in his eyes. We've lost 3 buses in winter over the last decade. No deaths, but close. This changes everything. Again, that phrase kept returning because it was true. Every route, every life, every fear around winter changed. As dusk approached, the workshop lights glowed warm over the founder bike restoration. The engine block had already been rebuilt, fresh chain fitted, fuel lines restored, the unfinished crest engraving nearly complete. Mason stood in the doorway watching the mechanics work. Behind him, Harper Lodge glowed across the snow like a lighthouse. The porch, the bunks, the church kitchen, the rescued trucker's daughter laughing with village children, the radio mast pulsing red, St. Michael's bell catching sunset. The whole valley had become what Elias Harper always saw hidden inside the storm. Then, the female state investigator approached with one final envelope. Mrs. Harper. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside was a formal state proclamation. Elias Harper, Day Annual Statewide Winter Safety Remembrance. The porch fell silent, because now the founder's name would live not only in the valley, but across Montana. Evelyn looked toward the road signs, the lodge, the rebuilt life around her. Then whispered, "He finally made it home." The words on the proclamation seemed to glow in Evelyn Harper's hands. Elias Harper, Day Annual Statewide Winter Safety Remembrance. For a long moment, nobody on the porch moved. The Montana sunset burned orange across the snowfields, washing Harper Lodge, St. Michael's Bell Tower, and the endless rows of Harleys in a warm light that made the entire valley feel sacred. Then, Walter Boone removed his hat. Slowly, deliberately. The old rancher's voice broke with emotion. 40 years they tried to erase his name. He looked toward the founder gate. Now the whole state will say it every winter. The porch answered with silence first. the kind that only comes when joy is too big for immediate words. Then the Harleys started. One engine, then another, then 100. By the time the sound reached the outer ridge, every bike in the valley was thundering in salute to Elias Harper Day. St. Michael's bell answered in perfect rhythm. The whole valley vibrated with memory made permanent. Inside the workshop, the Founder bike restoration continued under warm amber lights. The unfinished machine no longer looked abandoned. Now it looked like resurrection. The mechanics had rebuilt the engine block. The tank crest was nearly complete. Fresh chrome trim gleamed where old steel once sat unfinished for 42 years. Cole stepped back from the lift and wiped his hands. She'll run before midnight. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching the final machine her husband never got to finish come back to life. Not just the lodge, not just the road, now even his last ride. The symbolism was almost too perfect. Mason Creed stepped beside her. Think he'd approve? Evelyn smiled through tears. He'd complain about the carburetor. Then her smile widened. But yes. Outside, the governor's media team had already begun setting up a small stage beneath the Founder Gate. Nothing political, nothing flashy, just a wooden podium, a state flag. A hand-painted village banner made by the school children. The place. Winter loses. The phrase had become official without anyone planning it. Truckers repeated it, children painted it, news anchors used it, riders wore it on temporary memorial patches. By 7 p.m., the whole valley had gathered under the fresh lights. Villagers, church families, school children, state crews, investigators, hundreds of bikers. Even the rescued trucker and his daughter Lucy stayed another night just to witness what Harper Lodge had become. Governor Helen Ward herself arrived shortly after sunset. No convoy spectacle, just 2 SUVs and a state patrol escort. She stepped into the snow in a dark wool coat and stood still for a moment, taking in the sight. The lodge, the second wing, the Founder cut above the porch, the church bell, the endless bikes, the people. Her expression softened. This is extraordinary. The villagers parted as she walked toward Evelyn. The governor removed her gloves and extended both hands. Mrs. Harper. Evelyn took them. For a second, it was just 2 older women in the snow. One had protected a state from a distance. The other had protected a road alone for 40 years. The governor looked toward the lodge. You built what government spends millions trying to design. Evelyn shook her head gently. No, my husband did. We just finally listened. That line visibly moved the governor. She turned to the gathered crowd beneath the Founder Gate. Her voice carried strong and clear across the valley. Montana has always survived winter because ordinary people choose to protect one another. She gestured toward Harper Lodge. What stands here is not merely a shelter. It is a model of courage, mercy, and community. Then she lifted the proclamation high. From this day forward, every January 14th will be known across this state as Elias Harper Day. The valley erupted. Church bells, Harley thunder, children cheering, Walter Boone openly crying. Clara holding Father Donnelly's arm as the church volunteers applauded. The governor continued. And Harper Pass will become the first route in our statewide Winter Mercy Corridor initiative. A fresh wave of awe moved through the crowd, because now Elias's unfinished dream was no longer just being replicated. It was becoming the philosophy behind Montana's winter rescue system. Mercy had become policy. After the speech, the school children unveiled the finished state route sign. Reflective steel, blue lettering, state crest, Elias Harper Pass, Winter Mercy Corridor, Route 1. The sign was mounted beside the Founder Gate while the whole valley watched, a physical line between myth and history. Then, from inside the workshop, a sound, deep, low, alive. The Founder bike roared to life. The whole crowd turned. The engine note rolled through the valley like a voice from another lifetime. Cole rode it slowly out of the workshop, then stopped beneath the Founder Gate. The bike gleamed under the lights, restored panhead engine, hand-etched Founder crest tank, fresh leather saddle, old winter chains mounted beside the rear rack, a machine built by memory and finished by brotherhood. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. For a moment, she looked like she could actually see Elias astride it. Mason took the handlebars and carefully rolled it toward the porch. Then he looked at Evelyn. "It belongs in front." The entire crowd understood immediately. Not as a museum piece, as a guardian. The founder bike was placed permanently beneath the porch beside the lodge plaque, where every future traveler entering Harper Lodge would see it. A reminder, someone built this with his hands, someone died before he finished, someone kept it alive. As night deepened, bonfires were lit across the valley, stories began. Old riders told winter rescue tales, villagers shared memories of fuel cans left in storms, children sat wide-eyed under blankets listening to legends being born around them. Lucy, the rescued trucker's daughter, sat beside Evelyn on the porch. "Do you think people will still come here in 50 years? Evelyn looked over the lodge glowing against the snow. The church bell, the route sign, the Harleys, the founder bike, the second wing, the radio mast. Then she smiled. "As long as winter exists." St. Michael's bell rang once into the crystal-clear Montana night, and the whole valley knew this was no longer the end of the story. It was the beginning of tradition. The bonfires burned late into the Montana night. All across the Harper Valley, circles of firelight flickered against the snow, casting long shadows over parked Harleys, stacked lumber, church cots, and the gleaming founder bike resting beneath the porch. What had begun as a blizzard rescue had become something far greater, not just a sanctuary, not just a lodge, a tradition, the kind of place stories travel toward. Children from Briar's End sat wrapped in quilts near Father Donnelly's fire, listening wide-eyed as Walter Boone retold the night Elias Harper dragged 3 stranded riders out of Miller's Gorge with nothing but a rope, a lantern, and an old shovel. At another fire, Naomi and Ronan shared stories of winter roads from decades past, storms that swallowed highways, engines frozen solid, brothers surviving because one porch light stayed on in the dark. And every story, no matter where it started, somehow led back here. Harper Lodge, the place winter loses. Mason Creed stood near the founder gate, watching the valley breathe. Above him, the new state route sign gleamed under moonlight, Elias Harper Pass. Winter Mercy Corridor, Route 1. It still felt unreal. 40 years of lies had turned this road into a ghost trail. Now it had become the first official Mercy Corridor in Montana. Ronan walked up beside him holding 2 enamel mugs of coffee. "Hell of a thing," the old Western president said. Mason took the mug. "What?" Ronan looked toward the bonfires. "Watching a place go from myth to law in 2 days." Mason smirked. It was always law. People just forgot. That line lingered between them, because forgetting had always been the valley's real enemy. Not winter, not even greed. Forgetting who built the road, forgetting why the fuel cans were there, forgetting why one woman kept her porch lantern burning. Now, memory had structure again. Signs, laws, bunks, bells, maps, annual statewide recognition. The lodge could survive because the story could. Across the yard, Governor Helen Ward stood with Clara and the school superintendent discussing the rollout of the Winter Mercy Corridor program. 6 more route sites, 2 in northern ranch counties, 1 near the interstate pass, 3 around school bus danger zones, every single one modeled after Elias Harper's hand-drawn blueprint. Mercy had become infrastructure. Lucy, the trucker's daughter, came running across the snow carrying a school notebook. She stopped beside Mason, cheeks red from cold and excitement. "Can I show you something?" Mason crouched slightly. She opened the notebook. Inside was a child's drawing. The founder gate, the lodge, St. Michael's bell, the founder bike, rows of Harleys, a tiny figure of Evelyn on the porch with a lantern. Across the top, in careful handwriting, "The night the road came back." Mason stared at it longer than expected, because that was exactly what had happened. Not just a house saved, a road returned, a valley reconnected, a people remembering themselves. "That belongs in the lodge," he said. Lucy beamed. Evelyn, watching from the porch, smiled softly. Even now the story was already moving into the next generation. By midnight, the bonfires had settled into glowing coals. The children were asleep in the second wing bunks. Church volunteers rotated night soup duty. Riders took watch at the founder gate in quiet pairs. The whole valley had adopted the rhythm of Harper Lodge in less than 48 hours. Mason stepped into the workshop one last time before sleep. The restored Founder bike gleamed through the open doorway outside, visible beneath the porch lights like a silent guardian. Inside, the workbench was nearly clear now. Blueprints hung framed on the wall, the route maps pinned in state plastic sleeves, the Founder letter preserved behind glass. But one thing remained: Elias Harper's original road journal, the same leather ledger that had exposed Dalton's fraud. Mason opened it carefully. Near the final pages, beneath route calculations and fuel entries, Elias had written something Mason hadn't seen before. A closing line, likely his final journal note. A road is not measured by miles. It is measured by how many people reach home because it stayed open. Mason read it twice, then slowly closed the journal. Outside, the moonlight on the snowfields made the entire valley glow silver. The church bell rang once at 1 in the morning, soft, peaceful, like a heartbeat. When Mason stepped back outside, he found Evelyn already there beneath the Founder cut. She looked toward the distant northern ridge where the rescue road disappeared into darkness. "Do you know what scares me now?" she asked quietly. Mason looked at her. "What?" Her smile carried no fear at all. "That one day they won't need this place." Mason followed her gaze toward the glowing route signs, the school bus lane, the church road, the radio mast, the emergency trucks, then toward the second wing where the rescued father and daughter now slept like family. "They'll always need a place like this," he paused, "even if the storm isn't snow." That line landed deeper than either of them expected. Because Harper Lodge had become more than weather, it was proof. Truth can outlast lies, memory can outlast greed, community can outlast fear, the kind of shelter people need in every kind of winter. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then she looked toward the Founder bike and the steel gate. "He would have liked you," Mason laughed softly. "He'd have argued with me." That got the first genuine laugh out of her in years, a warm, human sound carried into the frozen valley. Near dawn, the first official state plow convoy rolled through Harper Pass under the new signs. Not emergency, routine. The road now belonged to life again. Drivers waved at the riders on watch. Children in the bunk wing stirred to breakfast smells. The church bell welcomed sunrise. And in the eastern sky, light began spilling across the valley, touching the Founder gate, the state corridor sign, St. Michael's bell tower, the finished second wing, the Founder bike, the porch lantern still burning. The lodge no longer stood as resistance. It stood as inheritance. Then Clara came out carrying fresh mail delivered by state courier. At the top of the stack was a thick cream envelope embossed with the seal of the National Winter Rescue Association. The whole porch looked at it, because now the story was about to grow beyond Montana. The cream envelope sat on Clara's breakfast tray like something from another world. Heavy stock, deep blue wax seal, embossed silver crest, National Winter Rescue Association. For a moment, the whole porch simply stared at it. The morning sun was just beginning to spill over the eastern ridge, painting Harper Lodge, St. Michael's bell tower, and the Founder gate in pale gold. Snow still clung to the iron letters. No rider dies in the cold. And beneath that gate, the state plow convoy had already cleared the upper school route before sunrise. The valley was moving, living, working, exactly as Elias Harper dreamed. Clara handed the envelope to Evelyn with both hands. This came by emergency state courier. Walter Boone let out a slow whistle. National. Even Mason felt the weight of what that meant. This story had already gone from widow to town, town to state, state to Mercy corridor system. Now it was reaching the country. Evelyn carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was a thick letter, a gold medallion, and a second folded document. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the first page. The porch went silent. Even the church volunteers carrying breakfast trays stopped to listen. Evelyn read aloud. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, in recognition of extraordinary humanitarian service, preservation of historic rescue infrastructure, and the successful rebirth of the Harper Winter Sanctuary model, the National Winter Rescue Association formally recognizes Harper Lodge as the first National Mercy Route Heritage Shelter in the United States. Your husband's original Winter Survival Code will be archived as a foundational humanitarian doctrine in our national training program. The words rolled over the valley like sunlight after endless storm. No one spoke, because they understood what had just happened. Elias Harper's porch lantern, his fuel cans, his handwritten shelter code were now becoming part of national rescue training. A single rider's mercy had become doctrine. Walter Boone took off his hat again. He'd done that more in the last 2 days than the last 10 years. The second paper slid open. The female state investigator, still on site, leaned closer. Her eyes widened. "This is federal recognition." Clara gasped. The document officially designated Harper Pass as the first federally registered Winter Mercy Heritage Route. The whole porch erupted. St. Michael's bell rang. Harleys thundered. Children from the bunk wing ran outside in blankets and boots. The rescued trucker and Lucy came out cheering with the church kitchen crew. Governor Ward's office immediately radioed congratulations from Helena. But the biggest emotional beat came next. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note from the national director. "We are sending a delegation next winter to study Harper Lodge as the national standard for community-based cold weather survival response. The country needs places like yours." Evelyn lowered the paper slowly. For a moment she simply looked out across the valley, at the road, the lodge, the gate, the founder bike, the second wing now fully complete, the school route plows, the villagers, the endless Harleys. Then her eyes lifted toward the mountains beyond the northern pass. "He always said the road was bigger than the rider." Mason stood beside her. Looks like he was right. By mid-morning, news helicopters circled high above Briar's End. National crews now. The kind of cameras that usually only come for disaster. This time, they came for hope. A national anchor stood under the Founder Gate. Behind him, the Founder Bike St. Michael's bell tower, the lodge schoolchildren carrying blankets, Harley chapters from across Montana, the Federal Heritage Route sign already being installed. He spoke into camera. What began as an 80-year-old widow saving 50 stranded bikers in a blizzard has now become the national model for winter mercy infrastructure. The valley watched from the porch in disbelief. The story had officially outgrown Montana. By noon, the federal sign was raised beside the state route marker, silver steel, black enamel lettering, a snowflake crest above the founder code. Harper Pass, National Winter Mercy Heritage. Route founder, Elias Harper. The entire valley stood in silence as the bolts were tightened, a permanent line in American winter rescue history. Lucy stood beside Evelyn and looked up at the sign. "So people from everywhere will know this road," Evelyn smiled. "They'll know what it stands for." The girl nodded thoughtfully. "Coming home." That line hit the whole porch like truth spoken by a child. Because yes, that's exactly what the road had become. Not just a route through snow, a route back to safety, back to memory, back to one another. In the afternoon, the lodge ran 2 more successful rescues. A stranded schoolteacher near the ridge turned an elderly couple with a dead battery on the church road routine now. No panic, just systems. Mercy in motion. The National Winter Rescue Association delegation even requested copies of Elias's Founder, code the original lodge blueprint route pin mapping the Founder bike restoration story, the community activation model used by Briar's End, everything the valley had rebuilt together. By sunset, the entire story had closed into something bigger than revenge, bigger than justice. Legacy. Mason stood alone at the Founder Gate as the sun dipped behind the snowfields. The steel words burned orange. "No rider dies in the cold." Behind him, children laughed in the second wing. The church bell rang. Harleys purred low, the Founder bike gleamed, the porch lantern burned, and the road beyond the valley stretched clear under federal signs all the way into the darkening pass. Evelyn stepped beside him. For a long while, they simply watched travelers moving safely under the new corridor markers. Then she whispered, "They tried to bury this place under concrete." Mason nodded. "And instead, they made it immortal." St. Michael's bell rang once more, slow, strong, timeless, and in the final light of the Montana evening, Harper Lodge stood exactly as it was always meant to stand, the place where winter loses and people find their way home.